I'm assuming I'm live here. It says I'm live. I don't know if I'm live or not. If I'm live, please say so on the chat and then tell me if you can hear me. Did you hear Meatball just now? Yeah. Super cat. Whoa. Oh, Meatball. She was trying to get up. She was sleeping and she gets up and she falls off the side of the table there. Oh no, poor Meatball. She's all right, folks. She's all right. Well, Bullet Catcher, I am going to be talking about the I'm depressed video, but that's not the only thing I'm going to be talking about. Hello, he who wants to know. I'm glad that you've finally been able to catch me live. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes here because I know that people take their time to come in, and so we'll wait until we've got some more people on the stream. This may be the last live stream I do on a Monday for a while because the summer vacations are over, and on Mondays I often have other things that I have to do during the week, and especially with Mondays. But usually weekends are for gaming, but every second Sunday isn't. As you guys know, my live streams are intentionally not done in a regular basis, right? Like I know that some people do, like Double D does them every Wednesday, right? But I don't, because I just don't want to make that time commitment unless I've got something interesting to talk about, right? And I'm not saying, Double D usually does have something interesting to talk about, and so do most of the other people that do regular live streams. But I tend to put a lot of my content on videos, and live stream is often when there's something that I think is going to take longer form, or that will benefit from audience interaction in the live chat, or if it's something that I suspect will be a little bit spicy or spicier than I typically am, right? So yeah, that's how it works. But I'll still be doing live streams. I just probably won't be doing them as often as I did over the South American summer. Nice to see everybody coming in. We've got a good number of people watching already. That's good. That's good. Calvinoni, thank you for coming. Well, Meatball fell off the table when I started petting her. Oh, $10 super chat from Wayne Brack. Thank you so much. I smite you with my bill of shitlord destruction for infinite damage. Now where's my loots? Well, you know that I usually don't have some kind of special thing that, like, I don't have subscribers and stuff. I know other channels do, and I don't, unlike some other live stream channels I've seen where they'll only read out super chats. I will read out other comments as I see fit. I like to do a lot of audience interaction when I'm doing a live stream. It's part of the point of having the live stream. But if you do a super chat, I'll always read it out, unless it's something that's going to get me like banned from YouTube or something like that. But tonight, there's probably going to be a very good chance that a significant bit of this video is going to touch on political issues, right? And so that makes it unlikely. Like right now, the live stream isn't being monetized, and I don't know if the video after will be able to be monetized. So I will be especially appreciative of any super chats that people present. And I want to bring to your attention, because Matt Mercer has made a big deal of how he donated $50,000 to charities that would then give that money indirectly to Hamas. So I figure that I should talk about my own charity, and my charity is in favor of adorable impoverished cats like Meatball here. See, Meatball is suffering from a tremendous tuna deficiency. She also doesn't particularly like to be held like a baby. but so what I will commit to you is that for every super chat I get tonight, I will be donating a tin of tuna to Meatball. So if you want to make sure that Meatball doesn't suffer from tuna deficiency, then please give your donations now. They will be gratefully received and faithfully applied. Isn't that right, Meatball? Yeah. Meatball's like, fuck off. I'm going to go sit on top of the DMG again. Meatball, if you knew what I was saying, if you knew that I'm talking about getting you tuna, you'd go crazy. Apparently, she doesn't recognize the word, but or at least she doesn't react when she hears the word. But she certainly reacts every time I open any can of anything because she's assuming it's going to be tuna. L says, Pundit, it's monetized, so you wouldn't get super chats. Yeah, it's not ad monetized. That's what I mean. I'm not going to do ad revenue from it, because I mean, like, the ad revenue that I get. But there's one. Mercurius Olicus gave to, I'm assuming, Australian dollars, and says feed Meatball. All right, so thank you very much. Meatball will be receiving a can of tuna thanks to your generous donation. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, that you know, the money that I get from ad revenue is not insignificant, because it's a three-figure income, right? So that's something, right? But it's pales in comparison to my book sales and everything else, right? But it's good, right? And that's the main way I monetize this channel, apart from the fact that usually, the real benefit that I get from this channel is that I highlight some of my books, and on account of that, people buy the books and then they enjoy the books. So that's always another great way to support me, which is if you like what I'm talking about, and if you agree with me on gaming, you're likely to enjoy my RPG products. And you should take a look and pick up my products like Sword and Caravan, or The Invisible College, or source book for Sword and Caravan there, Wilderlands of Sword and Caravan. Social Encounters. This says it's for the Silk Road. It's because it was published by the publisher Sword and Caravan, but this is actually a source book you can use for any OSR product to have a way to handle social interactions in your game without using like diplomacy skill or something like that. Like, it's mostly based on an expansion of the reaction table from D&D Basic Expert, and it then develops that further. Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. That's an incredible book of NPCs that are like all the historical characters that are in Sword and Caravan get a full workup with biography, with stats. There's other stuff in there too. There's an expanded timeline. There is, or not expanded in the sense of longer, but in the sense of more material there, with a lot of ideas for adventure events related to the timeline. And there's the assassin class, which people kept asking me for, and so I had to end up giving it. And of course, the basic rule book there, Lion and Dragon, Medieval Authentic Role Playing. Though soon there's going to be a second basic rule book, which is Baptism of Fire. It's still being worked on, but it is coming. All right. So okay, we got like 85 people watching. That's great. Thank you. So we might as well get started here as soon as I light my pipe. L says, what's tuna in Spanish? Maybe Meatball doesn't speak English. No, I speak mostly English to Meatball. I think Meatball doesn't understand Spanish at all. Tuna in Spanish is atún. It's ironically, it's the same letters, just reversed. Corey Simrock says, egg inspecting is highly skilled work. It is. She's the greatest egg inspector ever. Matthew Senon says, what's the best RPG Pundit book so far? Well, I guess that's a question more for the live chat than for me. But, I don't necessarily want to say which is the best book. Obviously, Lion and Dragon is the foundation of the system, the OSR system that I use. But I mean, that Star Adventure and the Invisible College are derived from the Lion and Dragon rules, so and they're also very good. And I think both Albion and Sword and Caravan are excellent setting campaign books. The World of the Last Sun and the Gonzo Fantasy Companion are excellent resources, whether or not you end up playing in the World of the Last Sun, right? And the Gonzo Fantasy Companion is even more so. It's not really about stuff that's specific to World of the Last Sun. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. But you know, the one that I think is the two that I think are like, if you're not interested in my settings, if you're not interested in the rule books themselves, probably the two that I think are the most standout in a way are Cults of Chaos, which I just did a video about how like you can set up an entire kind of adventure for you know, with an enemy group and all kinds of stuff in like under 10 minutes using Cults of Chaos. It's a set of random tables and a whole bunch of resources and information to create sinister groups. And then the Gonzo Fantasy Companion, similarly. I mean, I love really good random generators, right? There's like some really excellent random generators in the back of Sword and Caravan that have like everything you need to really like play it as not just a sandbox, but a sandbox where you can, like, the DM does very little work if you do it the full way, right? Like because all he needs to do is decide how to fit in this stuff in the encounter tables, whether you're on the Silk Road, in the Wilderlands, in a city, and the places that you go to, and then you roll for all kinds of adventure cues and rumors and personalities that the player characters will meet, right? So that's the sort of stuff that I find really cool in other people's products and that I strive to achieve in my own products, you know. So it's good stuff. L says his top seller is Lion and Dragon. Well, Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion are both platinum bestsellers, so those are the biggest sellers. Of course, they're older than the other ones, so you know, apart from Arrows of Indra. So it makes sense that they've sold more over the years. They still sell pretty well, I've got to say. Frank Destroso says, if you wouldn't mind touching on the subject, I've been listening to your Dying Sun, I think you mean Last Sun campaign. It's brilliant. The question I have is how much time of preparation goes into every session? Well, actually, you know, the game world I did not create from like all in one go, right? Like the campaign's been going for 11 years. And at the start of the campaign, I laid out a relatively small area, which is the Middle Northern Wilderness, which is where the campaign started. And like there were some places that I put there, right? Like there were the swamps and the forests and the mountains and the zombie plains and that whole deal. Oh, we got another super chat. Jeff Hatch, $2. A tun para gato. That's 2 cans of tuna for meatball now. And then after that, in terms of preparation, like the player characters, I would come up with some kind of adventure concept once every couple of sessions, because a lot of times the player characters will just go themselves and go do something. And of course, I had certain things that were in the places that you'll see that if you look at the Middle Northern Wilderlands section of World of the Last Sun. And then eventually I decided that it would be interesting for them to move on, because I mean, the world is gigantic, right? So gradually other areas appeared, right? The next was Arkholm, and then High Bay, and then the Southern Continent. And after that, they went up to the floating islands, and now they've been to like all kinds of, like, it's, you know, it's huge, right? The shithole, all these places, and I went developing them kind of bit by bit as I went along, you know. So in a sense, that was preparation. But usually nowadays with a session, like I've got like some very basic plot element that I come up with. And that usually runs stuff for one or anything from 1 to like a dozen sessions, as they just kind of then run with it. The players run with it and do this stuff. So it's not hard, really. It's not one that takes a lot of effort for me, you know. Chaos Druid says, ran a mini game with your Sword and Caravan book along with some of your other add-on sources. Curious, is there any chance of you making an addition going into the Mongolian Empire? I assume you mean like the post the post-Mongol invasion period. I suppose there is a chance. It's not something I plan to do immediately. If I do some kind of expansion for Sword and Caravan, it'll probably be about Song Dynasty China, because that's an era that's a subject that I really like, and that's right there in the same time period, right? So it would just be to add more details about what the Song Chinese culture is like, the monsters and magic, the customs and traditions, the martial artists, and the all the cool stuff that's there, right? In what was really the most advanced civilization until the Industrial Revolution. Wayne Brack says, I would watch a pundit live play. Useful to see knowledgeable, skilled people putting the skills into action, watching one talk about them. Well, Wayne, I mean, what Frank was referring to is that there is a YouTube channel called Bill the Elf. And for like several years now, he's one of my original players of World of the Last Sun. And for several years now, almost every single session of World of the Last Sun, he's been recording it on audio only, right? But recording it. And then he puts those recordings on that channel. And very few people seem to know about it or seem to want to care to watch it, because, they usually get less than 100 views, right? But like you can see there, me DMing and my players playing World of the Last Sun. And that's a campaign I run in English, so that's not a problem either. And you can see what an absolute laugh riot it is. And it's just incredible how long we've been playing now and how much detail that world has become. It's really fantastic. Slushy Simcambi, wait, I missed the Mercer discourse. No, that discourse has not yet started. I'm sorry, but we got a bit distracted now talking about some other subjects. But we will get to that. Don't worry. Elle says, look up Bill the Elf. That's the pundit's game. Yeah, exactly. Ryan Nilsson says, I have Cults of Chaos. It's great. It is. I was very proud of it. It was the first book I did that had that kind of level of complex generators being connected to each other in such a way to be able to do that. And I think it worked out really, really well. Frank Destrosa says, I love the settings. Thank you for that. Matthew Senans, is that right? Is that the right pronunciation? Sorry. Or is it Senans? Is that it? You'll have to let me know. Phil says, Lords of Olympus is the best in my experience. It's Amber Dice's role playing, but much better, especially if you don't care for the setting, which I don't. Well, thank you for that. Colonel Kronk says, are you planning a book like Gonzo Fantasy Companion for the Invisible College? I'm not really, but right now I am working on an issue of the Pundit Files. For any of you who don't know, the Pundit Files is my current periodical of short supplements. We're now on number 6, which is Siege Rules. And we're about to release, I think tomorrow, I believe it's tomorrow that we would be releasing number 7, which is an adventure called The Confraternity of Death. But one of the future Pundit Files is going to be a source book for Invisible College that is specifically the 1930s campaign. Okay, so it's the Invisible College with guidelines and timelines and material and tables to use to run a campaign of the Invisible College, not set in the modern day as the Invisible College is in the core book, but set in the 1930s, in the pre-war period, with all the intrigue that is going on between these occult factions. And so I change a lot of the details of, I don't change. I figured out what each of the factions were doing, the ones that were around back then were doing, and it's very different, of course. In the main Invisible College book, the biggest enemy that the Invisible College has is the Black Lodge. But in the 1930s, the Black Lodge have been completely screwed over because they were basically, on the side of the German, Turkish, Italian alliance, Austro-Hungarian alliance in World War I. They were the ones that were behind that, and they got their asses kicked, and now they're on the back foot because this little group of Aryan esotericists that they had brought into the Black Lodge in Germany turned against them. It basically double crossed them and became its own group, which is the Order of Thule. And now they're basically not all that important. The Gormagons and the Thulian Order, both factions of the Gormagons, the rationalists and the traditionalist Gormagons and the Thulians are the main enemies. And I think it'll be a very interesting source book for anyone who likes the Invisible College, especially if you, because I heard a lot of people were like, oh yeah, the Invisible College is really cool, but I'd like to play it like in the 19th century or in the in the 1930s or 1920s or something like that, right? And so that's what this is for. Wayne Brack says, Bill the Elf channel found and subscribed to. Thank you very much for the heads up. Well, yeah, it's good. Yeah, if anyone wants to hear me DMing, check out the audio recordings on Bill the Elf's YouTube channel. Sushi says, RPG Pundit, have you seen Dune 2? No, I have not yet seen Dune 2. I saw Dune 1. I thought it was not bad. So I'll probably end up seeing Dune 2 at some point. Wayne Brack says, what do you think about the Gonzo Fantasy Companion? I loved it. So many good ideas went through my head looking through it. Thank you for that. Matthew Senance, I hope I got that right, or Senance. What ways can a new D&D player integrate better into old school groups like this? That's an interesting question. I think that really integration just means check out the games. First and foremost, the OSR is about the games, right? That's number one. So to be in the OSR, you need to be playing the games, whether it's the original versions of TSR D&D or whether it's the OSR clones or whether it's the OSR second and third wave products like mine are, right? Or many others, James Raggy and Kevin Crawford and Greg Gillespie and all of that crowd, right? So, check out the games and then get into playing the games. If you need to find players, I guess for an online game or maybe an in-person game if you're lucky, check out the social media places, which is the RPGsite.com for one. Check out the hashtags for the OSR and the OSR people that are on X/Twitter. On Mewe, there are a lot of good OSR groups. I know Mewe might be unfamiliar to many of you, but it was like one of these Twitter clones that is still around, and it's largely not. It wasn't successful, but it became a big area for the OSR community, and there are some very active, very good groups there, and it's a free speech app, right? So it's a good place for those groups to be. But there are also some groups on Facebook, a few that are good, like OSR HQ and Conservative Gamers, I think it's called. And the Red Room has their own group there. Wayne Brack says Social Encounters on the Silk Road is great for ideas. Brother Gognard, it says Cults of Chaos is gold. Thank you, guys. Let's see what else we've got here. Retro Catafen says, how many hours a day do you spend writing? It really varies. But it's my full-time job, right? So I do quite a bit of writing, but creative writing, there's also a difference between when I'm like doing technical writing or creative writing, right? Like if I have to like transplant a bunch of rules and put that together, but it's like stuff that it's it's OSR, so I know what the rules are. I just have to write that stuff. That's like technical writing, and you can do a lot of that, right? But when you have to like start, or if I'm compiling a timeline, right, I have to look at the sources and put in the material and write it in and all that, and I could get a lot of that done. But when I'm like having to think up parts of stuff for like setting adventures or ideas for random tables that aren't that aren't preset, there a lot of times I might be spending quite a while where I will be doing relatively little actual writing in the end, but it takes a lot more brainstorming and whatnot. And yeah, so, but I do work every day, and for several hours. I wouldn't say I'm doing 8 hours a day of it, but one of the secrets of being a successful game designer is probably like, it's anybody can make a successful game, and maybe that's the one you've got in you, and you're not doing it as a career, right? But you're doing it as a labor of love. Great, go ahead, right? Now, if you want to be a successful game designer in the sense of being able to make a significant income or maybe even a full-time income on it, then you have to be producing quite regularly, right? You have to be coming out with stuff, and maybe not as much as I do or the Red Room does, right? But or even as much as, like, say, James Raggy does. So he has the clever idea that he gets other people to write stuff for him too, and he's a publisher. But you have to be coming out with new stuff at some kind of routine level, right? Because even though there's a long tail of sales, most of the sales you get are going to be early on when a product comes out. And so eventually a product that will do very well at first, but unless you make more stuff, it's not going to keep selling. Yeah. Let me see what else people are saying. Oda Manjiro says, is Pundit sound cutting in and out? I hope not. If people are having problems with the sound, please let me know. Maybe I'm just talking too quietly, or I'm not close enough to the mic. I'm not sure. It's supposed to have a good mic, but let me see here. Some good advice from RPG Grandma there. Be open to different systems. Be open to Gonzo, to high magic, to low gritty. Be open to having fun. Yeah, those are all a little bit of aphorism type, but yeah, you're not wrong. That's for sure. Mercurius Olica says, what was that Twitter substitute? Could you spell it? It's Mewe, Mewe. Not W-I-L, it's W-E, M-E-W-E, Mewe. Sage Master says D&D gets too much attention. I suspect you're in the minority in this particular chat. RPG Grandma says most OSR folks are friendly. Well, the ones that are the real OSR folks are, yeah. Not the hipster OSR or the bro SR or the woke OSR, but the real OSR. All right, it looks like I have caught up here. And DH asks, so how has Mercer damaged the hobby? All right, that's a good start. Matthew Cadence asks, are Lemmy and Mastodon good alternatives for Reddit and X Twitter? I have no idea about either of those. I know that there are a lot of people that use Discord. I don't use Discord, but apparently there are some good Discords. All right, so let me light up my mic before I start with the saga of Matt Mercer here. Jace, Mewe, there is a company called Mewe that's Chinese, but the app Mewe, the social media app Mewe, apparently is not Chinese owned. It's I forget the guy's name, but it's started by a Western guy who believes in free speech. And actually, like, privacy and security was a really big deal when he came out with it, right? So all right, so the main topic of tonight comes about Frank Distress asks, what am I smoking? So this is a Stanwell Deluxe Apple, I guess it would be. And I'm smoking Argento Natural in it. So the topic of tonight comes up because Matthew Mercer, who had been kind of laying low, I think, ever since Candela Obscura came out and a whole bunch of people trashed it as a garbage game. He just a couple of days ago, he showed up on Twitter in a video where he was, I don't know what he was dressed as, and his nails were painted red. and he talked about how he was feeling horribly depressed. He was suffering from a terrible depression because of the genocide that was ongoing in Gaza, the horrible Israelis that were killing millions of Gazan children or something like that, right? And about how brave he was about dealing with his depression, you know. And I think that video could be described as peak-Mercer, or, you know, jump the shark Mercer if you prefer. But really, Mercer's whole track has been a process of really grotesque narcissism and damaging to the hobby, as I'm going to be talking about tonight. And so I guess that would be the peak of, you know, horribleness, where he talks about how depressed he is, that you know, these poor terrorists are not being allowed to keep on killing Jews. Yeah. Frank Destro says, I can't find Argento Natural in the States. I don't think they export outside of the Southern Cone. In this video that's on X, I'm sure some of you have seen it and some of you probably haven't. Matt Mercer went into detail about his depression in a way that was superficially, obviously, to elicit sympathy, but underneath that, it was the most obvious kind of humble brag you could imagine, right? Like, he was, you know, we live in an era where victimization of any kind actually gives you social credit, and that's what he was doing it for, right? And what he was, you know, the essence of his delivery was very clearly this kind of, oh, look at me, I'm so courageous dealing with this, and you know, I feel like this because I just feel so much deeper than most of you feel, right? I'm just such a more super evolved person that it affects me so hard, right? It was just disgusting, right? And you know, essentially, he was using his depression as a means of his alleged depression as a means of showing off, you know. And now, I mean, there are obviously people who really do suffer from depression, and those people, you can generally tell that they're actually depressed if they end up talking about it, because you can hear the undertone of the kind of contempt they have for their own depression, right? And how you know, the trauma that it gives them, and then there are a ton of people that pretend depression because it's become a fashionable social tool. And those people, you can always tell because it sounds like they're incredibly proud of their depression in the undertone of their conversation, you know. So I'm not saying that everybody who has depression. A good example, and I think Grim Jim, I didn't see it, and I intentionally chose not to watch it because I know that Double D has done a video about this, the Red Room has done a video about this, and Grim Jim has done a video about this, and I haven't watched any of them. I caught a little bit of the beginning of the Double D's live stream, but then I had to go eat, so I didn't watch it. And I'm sure that Grim Jim, I would bet hard money that Grim Jim is going to be really critical of Matt Mercer's theatrical depression, you know, because Grim Jim is a guy who has really suffered from depression, and you can see that, right? Like, you could, like, it's literally even when he's not talking about it, there are times when you can see it, like, it's visible in his face, you know, like, and it's a terrible kind of suffering, right? I wouldn't wish real depression on anyone, right? Like clinical depression on anyone, you know. So this is in no way to criticize people that actually suffer from genuine clinical depression. But the problem is that in our society, we've created this mentality that if you are in any way a victim, you get to a higher social status, right? And so inevitably, people are going to weaponize victimhood in whatever way they can, right? And Matthew Mercer is a white male. I presume straight. Like, I mean, I know that I believe he's married. He might, you know, like, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he said he's non-binary or something. I mean, the red nail polish is an obvious, you know, attempt to hit the fashion button as well. But you know, that white males are by definition at the bottom of the progressive stack. They're the least idolized group, right? So leftist white males have to go that extra mile to do this stuff, and of course, theater kids who get into that side of things are going to be really good at it, you know. Except he's not a very good actor, you know, because I think everybody that I've seen that's commented on this video saw right through it, you know, like that. This is why Matt Mercer is not, you know, like he's not starring in multi-million-dollar blockbusters, right? Because he's just not that good, right? He's not like, you know, Robert Downey Jr. at his peak or something like that. You know, he's not even Robert Downey Jr. when he was like at his worst, you know, like he doesn't even come close to that, you know. I've seen much more heartfelt and believable emotional performances from Nicolas Cage than this guy, right? Though Nick Cage is great because a lot of times he intentionally doesn't try, right? And that there's a real talent in that. So yeah, he is. It was just a ridiculous display, right? And then on top of that, of course, he had to do the leftist virtue signaling in support of the of a terrorist organization, you know, and this ridiculous lie of there being a genocide going on in Gaza, you know. And I don't know how much you guys want me to get in on the politics of the current conflict in Gaza. But you know, I did the last video I did, ironically, on Matt Mercer was late last year when Mercer donated and was very loud and public about donating $50,000 to these supposed charities that money was going to Gaza, right? And I pointed out that this is in essence a donation to Hamas because we know that Hamas hijacks all aid that arrives in Gaza. So he was literally donating money to a terrorist organization and virtue signaling about it. You know, let me take a look a bit at the comments here, just so I. The first people they put up against the wall or throw off a roof if they came here and took over. Yeah, like one really does wonder about, like, you know, chickens for Kentucky Fried Chickens and queers for Palestine, right? Like it's a bit weird, you know. And now you guys are seeing why I'm saying that there's a very good chance that even after the live stream, the video version of this is not going to be monetizable on YouTube. So again, for those of you who came in late, I will appreciate any and all super chats, and for every super chat I get, you will be donating to my charity of choice, which is the Tunas for Cats charity, which means that for every super chat that I receive, I guarantee that Meatball will receive a can of tuna. You can't get a purer and better charity than that. Jeff says, what Mercer plays isn't a play style I would play or even support at a table. It's drama club for YouTube loot anyways. Well, yes, and I'll get into that too, I promise. Mac just gave a $2 super chat for Meatball's Tuna. That's great. So that's 3 cans of tuna that we have raised tonight for Meatball, that has told me again and again that she has tuna deficiency and that I don't give her enough cans of tuna. So you know, this is going a long way to helping the Meatball, who is by far the neediest person in my house. So there you go. North of the Rockies says not one of his better performances. North of the Rockies says PTSD is also quite trendy. Well, yes, it is, right? But PTSD requires that you be able to have something that causes the PTSD, right? Oh, Mercurius Solus, I think, just made a super chat, $2 Australian. He's holding his cat hostage. Fred Gorley, $1.99. So that is now, what is that? Was that number 4 and 5, right? So that's 5 tins of tuna for Meatball. Thank you, guys. So the depression is actually like easier. You can just say, well, I'm sad because of all the hard things that are out there in the world, and of course you can say it also because, like, if he said he had PTSD because of the genocide, that might be like that would be a different take, and I think that he was smart to say depression instead, right? Because he's feeling empathy for the Palestinian people. Pundit L says, Pundit, Matt Mercer did the same thing this week that Hassan Piker did last week, basically just shy of Gal Gadot singing Imagine by John Lennon. Jeff said, a dramatic personality used an event to do a dramatic for attention. No. Well, the problem is that in the process, he was praising a terrorist organization or defending a terrorist organization, right? Victor says, how can you tell it's fake depression? Well, watch Matt Mercer's video of him talking about how depressed he is because he's such a deep feeling person, and the poor Gazans, and then go watch Grim Jim talking about depression, and you will see the difference. Okay, that's how you can tell, right? Most people who have actual depression, like clinical depression, feel this kind of terrible shame and this terrible weight about being depressed, right? Which is unfair to them, but it's something that happens, right? I've known several people that had clinical depression, and that's very identifiable compared to people that claim to be depressed in order to get sympathy or to get something that they want from you. Oh, $5 Canadian from Jeff. Meat for the meatball. I think that's 6 tins of tuna. I'm gonna have to get quite a lot of tins of it. Meatball, you're on a roll here. Let's see what else we're saying here. RPG Grandma says Twitter is the worst place to talk about mental health, but yeah, it's now a thing to pretend to do that, so I can't help. I'm fine with Mercer making money, and I get he has some nutter fans. Jeff says it's the feminization of society. Steambob says, I hate the vertical format YouTube streaming on mobile. It took away 2x speed. I'm sorry about that, Steambob. North Rocky says, the way he deliberately rubbed his eye to show off his painted fingernails. Yeah, well, there are several moments where he was kind of like doing stuff with his hands to make sure everybody saw how he painted his fingernails, right? To show that he's such a sensitive person. Amarillo D20, $10. What class would Meatball be in Castles and Crusades? I don't know. Is there an acrobat class in Castles and Crusades? Because I think she could be that. She could be that from like the old Unearthed Arcana. Let me take a look here. So that's like 7 tins now. Matthew Sinasa says, so in other words, the culture has shifted into giving more support to victims, so people are trying to abuse this. Yes, that is correct. Let's see what else. Jay Sauber says Grimm is actually a little more sympathetic. Well, yeah, he is sympathetic because he has suffered for years from clinical depression. That is something one should feel sympathetic about, Jeff says, does Mercer do the woke land acknowledgement invocation at the beginning of his sessions yet? I have no idea. I've never heard about him doing that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Don't give him or just give him ideas. Give him more rope to hang himself with. RPG Grandma says, Hamas has killed people trying to get foods. Yeah, well, I'll get into that. I don't see anyone commenting one way or the other how much they want me to get into the specific politics of this war, but Frank DeSour says, "This is the way of the world that Critical Role has millions of followers, but me and 10 other people are the only ones listening to Bill the Elf." Dragon Shadow says, "There's a book called A Paradoxical Alliance. It's about the left's obsession with Islam. I think the premise is they advocate for similar things in different ways." Look, the origin of the left's obsession with Islam comes out first from Edward Said's book Orientalism, which basically accused the West of othering anybody who isn't from the West, and was an incredibly influential book in academia in like the 1970s, I believe, or the 70s and the 80s. And after that, the generation of critical theory and deconstructionism, both of which said that the West is basically the worst thing that ever happened to humanity, when in fact it is the best thing that ever happened to humanity, created this concept of how, all human interaction, it like took Marxism, which talks about class warfare, and universalized that into the idea that in all human interaction, somebody is abusing and somebody is being abused. It is unquestionable, right? And so there's always oppressor and oppressed in every interaction, right? That guys like Foucault and Derrida claimed that there is no actual truth or objective reality, and that everything is in fact semantic conflict, right? So anything that we think of as reality is actually a conflict of two narratives, and it is usually taking the form, in most cases, not of an active war of narratives, but of one person oppressing someone else with their narrative. And so then the oppressed person has therefore the right to do whatever is necessary to overthrow that narrative and replace it with theirs, right? But the practical measure of that is seen by Paul Pot, who was a student of these guys, who said, okay, so that means that, because you have some people in Cambodia that have, that have nice shoes, we can kill those people, right? That's the conclusion from that line of thinking. Everything is oppressor versus oppressed. And so the combination of that with the kind of general accusation that the West is irredeemably racist meant that from that point on, any conflict, regardless of activities that were going on between darker skinned people and lighter skinned people, because it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't even have to involve Caucasians necessarily, right? Is one where the darker skinned people are by definition the ones that are the oppressed, and therefore have the right to do anything to the lighter skinned people. It became the color test on Family Guy, right? So instantly to the ultra leftists in Europe and eventually in the United States and in Canada, the conflict, which it interestingly enough, when the state of Israel first came about, because a lot of Zionists were also essentially socialist, the kibbutzim and all of that. The left in the West in the early part of the history of Israel were big supporters of Israel, and then that shifted and they became big supporters of the Palestinians, right? Because the Palestinians were now the oppressed people fighting against the oppressor, even though that is not in any way true, because they were never the oppressed people. They were always the aggressors, So, but because, Israelis are white and Palestinians are darker, although there's a lot of dark-skinned Israelis too, right? That was it. That was enough for them to decide that that's how they're going to have this alliance, to the point of the left having, especially in the last 20 years or so, made the largest revival of anti-Semitism in the West, right? Like anti-Semitism was reduced largely to tiny groups of kind of ridiculous, white supremacists and living in some shack somewhere. completely fringe groups, and it was seen as a completely unacceptable point of view until suddenly the Labour Party and the Progressive Democrats and the Liberal Party of Canada started to decide that it's okay actually to be anti-Semitic because Israel is an apartheid state, which it is not. It's absolutely the opposite of an apartheid state, right? Literally, there's no place in the entire Middle East where an Arab citizen has more rights than an Arab Muslim has in Israel. An Arab Muslim citizen of Israel has the greatest amount of individual rights and government rights and voting rights of any Arab Muslim in the Arab Muslim world. So they are the least oppressed people. All right, so let me see what else we've got here. What else people were talking about? Corbinizer says, I've been diagnosed with PTSD not from Twitter, but from mortar fire in Iraq. Right. Well, PTSD, you never actually get PTSD from something that happens to other people, right? PTSD is something that happens to you, right? From something that you were in. I'm assuming Corbinizer served his country and yes, that is, and again, it is so obvious to see the real PTSD versus someone faking it, unless someone is an incredibly good actor, which Matt Mercer is not. He is a terrible actor. RPG Grandma says his fans are beating him up for not being vocal. In fact, his fans did beat him up for not being vocal. Well, not literally beat him up, but they were criticizing him severely until he did that big donation, and then he didn't talk about it again. So then they were criticizing him again. So yes, a lot of this is that the Critical Role people, the fans of Critical Role, is undoubtedly filled with a whole bunch of woke people, and those woke people believe any nonsense that Hamas tells them, and that anybody else tells them that seems to be on the left side, and they were pressuring him. Yes, but I mean, that's not an excuse, right? Jeff Ramdenkar says, do you think Matt Mercer did anything positive for the hobby? Okay, so I think, I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but I think that you could say that there was a potential side effect of something positive in the hobby, and that it is possible that there is a group of people out of the many numbers of people that got into Critical Role. We know only half of them have ever played RPGs. Out of that half, we know most of them haven't played a lot, and most of them have only played 5e, or I guess some of them have tried Camera Obscura now. But I believe that it is possible that there's some group of people that might have started the discovery of RPGs through Critical Role and then quickly moved past it and maybe have discovered, the actual gamers and have become actual gamers themselves. If there's anyone out of the people watching, 150 people watching right now, whose first experience of RPGs was through Critical Role, please let us know. We promise we won't laugh at you because you're here now, right? So obviously that means that it served some purpose, right? But I mean, that is the only very peripheral thing that Matt Mercer ever did that was good for this hobby. I'm going to explain all the bad stuff over the course of this live stream. Laranjenko says, does Mercer have depression? The guy who's rich and American, if he has depression, what do I, who am Brazilian and live in a communist country, have? Well, that's the thing, right? Like you could be a billionaire and have clinical depression, right? There's, in some cases, it's like literally a chemical dysfunction in the brain, right? So you could be a rich guy who has depression, but you don't get depression because you've looked at tweets, right? That is not something that generates depression, and like actual clinical depression. You could say, I'm sad about it, right? Or I sympathize, I empathize, but say, I'm suffering from depression because like that is instantly fake. Going to say, I'm going to go fund me for Mercer for some testosterone supplements. I think if you did a fundraising for estrogen supplements, he might feel socially pressured to take them. Dark Wielder says, what is your approach to a sword and sorcery setting? I think I'd rather stay on the topic for the moment, but that would be a good topic for me to do for some video sometime. I'll try to remember that. Jace Offline says, Offire says, I'd rather not touch this war with the 10-foot pole. Jerry Harris says, look up the article from Times of Israel for years, and Yahoo propped up Hamas. Okay. There are different media groups in Israel, just like anywhere else, ranging from unbelievably left-wing ones to right-wing ones, and a lot of them, like in a lot of countries, are affiliated more with one party than another. What is true is a couple of things, right? Is that the government of Israel, not under Netanyahu, but rather under Ariel Sharon, retreated from Gaza, took all of the settlements out, retreated the army, and said, it's yours now, right? And let the Gazans do whatever they wanted to do with it, right? Which, in retrospect, was obviously a mistake, right? Because it was inevitable that it was going to fall in the hands of the most violent terrorist faction that was in the area, right? So that was a bad mistake, right? But it was to say, well, you guys are ruling yourselves now. You do what you want, right? And they have that has been since I think that was in 2005. Okay, so this idea, this is a response to the continued oppression that they did. No, there was literally no occupation in Gaza. Gaza was self-governing internally, and Hamas won an election that never had to do one again because they just took power, and then they used that time. They could have done anything. They could have said, well, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make like the Singapore of the Levant. You know, we're gonna become an information hub. We're gonna do engineering schools. We're gonna just try to make a successful society that will then, you know, which would in some ways put a whole other kind of pressure on Israel, right? But no, they decided to just be terrorists, right? And to continue constantly firing rockets, sending in people to murder people, and all of that stuff, right? And then the other thing that is true is that I think successive governments, probably including Bibi Netanyahu's, did not take enough action to things they knew were happening, to things that happened, like, you know, lesser terrorist attacks that happened over the course of the last 20 years, to things they knew were happening, like the construction of these tunnels and all of that stuff, and the level of armaments that had been built up by Hamas, all of this, in part because they felt that this was in some way beneficial to their party continuing in power, right? In that, you know, when there's a lot of times, if there's in any country, if there's like security danger, people will prefer voting for conservatives over liberals because they tend to think, often correctly, that liberals will just betray them, you know, they'll just surrender or something, you know. Ben says, does Bill the Elf paint his nails? No, Bill the Elf does not paint his nails. Ray Gardner says, Israel has every right to defend itself. Yes, and it's especially damning that Israel has had since for all of its history, after constant attempted wars of annihilation against it, keeps having to declare that it has the right to defend itself. That should be obvious, or any country that should be obvious, right? I mean, Ukraine has the right to defend itself against the Russian invasion, right? Whatever else one might think of the Ukraine war, right? There's a lot of real crap there, but I'm definitely not getting into that right now. So, L says 200 billion spent on foreigners while veterans and dying on the streets, and illegals get 500 a night in New York City hotel rooms. Okay, like as far as Americans are concerned, you can definitely, like, first of all, you can definitely make criticisms of the state of Israel, and, you know, before now and what have you, without that being in any way necessarily anti-Semitic, right? It's not anti-Semitic to criticize specific things that specific people do or specific things that a government does, okay? And you can also criticize your own government's spending on enormous levels of foreign spending, right? And there can be a discussion about that, right? Like that is a legitimate thing to bring up and to discuss and to complain about if you're an American, right? So I'm not saying that that's not the case, right? There is, however, at the same time, questions of strategic value, right? Like one of the things you do have to keep in mind is that Hamas has literally called for a global intifada in response to the fact that in crazy, Israel, after they massacred 1,200 people and committed rapes and killed babies and grandmas, that Israel would in reaction to that attack Gaza and attack Hamas, right? So they are calling for global intifada means worldwide terrorism. That's what they're calling for, right? And they have repeatedly declared that these targets should be all over the West, right? So the idea that this is only a danger to Israel in the Middle East is not exactly true, right? And the Houthis, who are being paid for by Iran, which is the same people that are now paying for Hamas, which is incredible, by the way, because Hamas is Sunni, right? But now they're being bankrolled by Shiite Iran. The Houthis are raiding shipping lines, right? And that means that the price of everything is going to go up, right? It is going up, right? It's as a result of those attacks, because ships can't go through there anymore, right? Or we'll have to go around, and that increases the cost of shipping, and that is a real hit to the economy of every country, including the United States, right? So there are moments where it's necessary. I mean, even like one of the first actions that the U.S. did internationally after it became a country was going after the Barbary pirates, right? And that was because you have to protect shipping, right? Like there are some things you have to do. You can discuss how much, right? It's totally legitimately a point to be able to debate what should be done and how much should be done and how much should be spent on it, right? And I totally agree with you on that. Victor says, well, I think you're assuming intention from Mercer. He could really be affected by the situation. Doesn't mean he chose it just to get good boy points. Well, first of all, the entire economy of the left is virtue signaling. So everybody who's doing it in public is doing it to get good boy points on that side. But second, yes, there is two possibilities. One is that he is a self-serving, cynical piece of garbage that doesn't really give a damn at all about anything to do with Gaza, and he's doing this because his fans are pressuring him to, and because he knows that it's a way to gain prestige on the left. And the other is that he really believes that there is a genocidal attack happening where Israel is the aggressor against the Gazan people and the poor Palestinian people. And in that case, he's a moron, right? Anyone who believes that is a moron. It is somebody who has at the very least made zero effort to actually study the situation. Jeff says, careful with the tuna, though. Cat slivers have mercury and bad stuff in it. Well, look, first off, Meatball does not get tuna more than usually once a week, right? So yeah, I am aware of that, right? Like obviously you don't want any kind of food outside of standard rations is not necessarily something you want to be giving too often to an animal, because you don't know exactly how that'll affect them. Second, though, in 17 days, it's going to be Meatball's birthday, and she's turning 14, right? Which makes her the equivalent of a 78-year-old woman. Okay, so at that point, my perspective is let her get all the enjoyment, all the pleasure she can out of life, right? Like, there's not a lot of time ahead of her, so I want her to be as happy as possible for as long as she's still around, but yeah, don't worry. I don't give her, like, I'm not giving her a tin of tuna a day or something like that, right? And I'm not giving her a full tin of tuna when I give it to her. I give her some tuna because I use the tuna also when I'm cooking or whatever, and that's usually when she gets tuna. Samuel N says, was Edward Said kind of forerunner for the Arab Bath Party? No, Edward Said was an academic. He was an academic. It's fair enough to say he was an academic. He's an academic that had a very biased perspective of certain things. And no, I don't think he was really an inspiration for the Bath Party. Let me see here. Okay, I think we're catching up now. Oda Manjiro says, I thought salmon had more mercury than tuna. Well, I think all fish has mercury, which is why they tell even humans that you probably shouldn't be eating fish every day. It's usually very small amounts of it, but of course, cats being smaller could be more vulnerable to it. But yeah, generally, whatever the fish is, you really don't want that to be a major part of a cat's diet. It should be, if anything, just the occasional treat. All right, damn it. I think I just jumped here. Man. Yeah, I've got a lot of catching up to do here. Where was that? Oh, here we go. Okay. Insane Nerd Ramblings, the West so horrible that it wiped out slavery across the planet. Well, I wish that they had. They wiped out the intercontinental slave trade. But the West has not wiped out slavery all across the planet. There are slave markets open in Libya today that are largely, the slaves are largely sub-Saharan Africans that are captured in sub-Saharan Africa, shipped to Libya, and then sold internally in Libya and exported to countries throughout the Middle East as slaves, right? And for that matter, the Americas still have slaves. In Haiti, there are 300,000 slaves, the Restavix, who are indentured as slaves, as children to a specific family, and basically become unpaid, lifelong servants of that family who, can be abused in any way that they wish to be, that their owners wish to abuse them. So there is still slavery, but the West has done more to try to eliminate it than anywhere else. Let me see here. My name says that may be true, but how many Muslims are citizens? I presume you mean how many are citizens of Israel? 20% of Israel, of Israeli citizens are Muslims, I believe. That's like a couple of million. Okay, there are a lot of Israeli Muslims there, because what happened in 1948 is that the foreign powers that attacked Israel in 1948, that is Jordan, Syria, Egypt, I think I'm forgetting one, but anyways, they when they invaded, they sent out radio transmissions saying, the wicked Jews will murder you all if you stay in your houses. Get out of your houses so we can then come in and just indiscriminately kill all the Jews. And then once it's over, you'll be able to come back and you'll be able to have nicer houses because you'll get to live in the houses the Jews have, right? And so large percentage of the people there, which was back then, I think it was maybe half of the people of the Arabs that were there at that time in British Mandate Palestine when 1948 rolled along, evacuated. They left, and they all assumed that they would be back in days because everybody in 1948, when that war started, everybody in the world was sure that these armies that outnumbered Israel 10-1 would exterminate every Jew left there, and that it would be over in days, right? And instead, the Jews kicked their asses, which is wonderful. And so the people that abandoned their homes were not allowed to return because they had been essentially aiding the enemy. But the other half that stayed, that said, no, we're not leaving, because even though there were enormous conflicts from the early 1930s until 48, there was also a society that was a mixed society there, right? And there were people that were assuming that the partition of the mandate was going to happen, and that felt that they were going to be able to be fine living in a majority Jewish country, and so they said, no, we're not going to leave, right? And all of those people who stayed kept their houses, they kept out their land, right? And they became citizens, and they vote for political parties. There are two major political parties in Israel that are primarily Muslim, and they have all the same rights. They are not. One of the things they don't have is that they're not obliged to conscription. The majority of Jewish citizens, when they turn 18, have to join the military for a stint, right? Muslims don't have to, but a lot of them do anyways. And so that should. There are Muslim fighters in the IDF. There are Muslim Mossad agents. There's Muslims at every level of government. There are Muslim judges. Supreme Court judges. All of that. So it is the most democratic country in the Middle East. It is the most religiously diverse country in the Middle East. The most racially diverse country in the Middle East, and it is the country where citizens have the most freedoms in all of the Middle East. Okay, so let me see what else we've got here. Goldschlager says, I love how Mr. Mercer took the extra step to appease his community by painting his fingernails. Yeah, that's the other part of it. It was like ultra performative, because I'm pretty sure that, well, I don't know, I don't watch a lot of Matt Mercer, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't always have his fingernails painted, although I am pretty sure that he often wears a variety of outrageous outfits or makeup or whatever because he's a malignant narcissist, right? Like that is, he doesn't suffer from depression. He suffers from narcissism, right? The guy's clearly an egomaniac. My name says, if CR was your first experience of D&D, I feel bad for you. I tried to watch a couple times. It was awful. Yeah, but there might be a few people who saw that and saw, well, the D&D looks kind of cool, but these guys aren't. and then ended up discarding. That's my only hope. That's the only way I think that it is at least marginally possible that CR did anything good, Wayne Brack says depression is not a clinical imbalance in the brain. I live this latest research is that it's a thinking problem, to state it generally without details. Well, there are different forms of depression, and certainly there is depression that can be caused by trauma, or depression that can be caused by other aspects, but there is also an element of chemical depression, right? Like those all exist. I don't know if in the brain is actually the right way of putting it. I'm not a doctor. This is not a professional opinion, right? So I might have been wrong in saying in the brain, but I'm sure the brain has something to do with it, your ways of thinking is something that happens in the brain. All right, so okay, I'm going to get to talking first about why it's not just about this video. It is about, this video is basically the cherry on top of the shit sundae of all the reasons why Matt Mercer has been bad for this hobby, right? So the most recent thing is he's bad for the hobby because he is encouraging anti-Semitic libel against Israel, right? That is a bad thing, and he's encouraging other people to support the same. But essentially, Matt Mercer has always been bad for this hobby, and specifically, he's been bad for 5th edition. I'm not saying that everything bad that happened in 5th edition is Matt Mercer's fault necessarily, but I do believe that Critical Role and therefore Matt Mercer were an accelerant of a process that might have happened anyways or might not have. I don't know. So this is the thing, right? Some very smart people came up with a highly playable edition of D&D. Some certain people. That was 5th edition. And 5th edition came out around what, 2014, not that long ago, around 2014. And it became very successful very quickly, right? It got large sales, especially in light of, the fact that the previous edition had been horrible and a lot of people had abandoned the game. It brought people back to the game, but it brought new people into the game. And there is I think it's a dividing line, you could say, between the before and after of when Critical Role starts to get popular. And I think Critical Role really starts to get popular around what, 2018 or so, let's say. And so if you look at 5th edition, if 5th edition had stopped producing anything else around 2018, you would have had what was basically a pretty good run. Like the main game is really playable, actually. I know that a lot of old school gamers will that it won't be your favorite ever, right? But it was a very playable system, which made it very easy for casual play. So it had a lot going for it, right? And it's the books that came out up to that point were mostly adventures, and they were okay adventures. I don't think any of them reached the peak of some of the greatest adventures of the old school era, without a doubt, and maybe not reached the peak of a couple of the adventures in the 2nd edition era, but there were some, they were good, they were okay, right? It was a good product, and it had gained a large fan following, right? And it came out at a time also where there was a lot of like kind of nostalgia stuff going on. Stranger Things was actually the first kind of thing that came out that provided a kind of motivator into D&D. And Stranger Things was an example of something that was a healthy and positive motivator in a way, because it was a show about the 80s, right? So it was full of the 80s nostalgia of these kids playing 80s D&D. And the people that wanted to get in on 5th edition wanted to have a replication of that kind of experience, right? And of course, it was still not authentic because it was a TV show, and it meant that, like, there were some of the same problems in that people were going to be trying to recreate the excitement of these kids playing a game in the 1980s, and that's not the point, right? The point is to create an exciting experience by playing the game as it is and doing it organically. But it was still something. It brought a lot of people into the hobby. It made it by that point already, before Critical Role ever came along, 5th edition was the most successful edition that Wizards of the Coast had put out. It was more successful than 3, 3.5, or 4E, right? And in fact, by that time, I believe the number of PHBs, Player's Handbooks, that 5th edition sold was already more than that of all previous WotC editions put together, okay? So it had become hugely successful without Critical Role, right? And then Critical Role came along. And when Critical Role happened, that became a turning point, because it became a turning point in various ways, okay? So to start with, Critical Role created something that was an ersatz imitation of a game that people were taking to be real, right? And what I mean by this is that it's not that Critical Role was scripted, right? I'm not claiming these guys all knew exactly what was going to happen in the episode beforehand, and they had memorized their lines and were playing these lines. That's not what these guys were doing. What they were doing, however, was a kind of improv acting, right? And they were putting on all of their actor qualities in the show, right? And you could say, no, they were just being themselves, right? No, they were not being themselves, okay? And I'm going to explain why. In the first place, the show is not about them playing D&D. It's about them playing people playing D&D. Okay? In the sense that the way they behave in the show, and I've said this in previous videos many years back when Critical Role was starting up, in the sense that what they're doing is a fake portrayal of not how they would normally act, but how they're acting as actors portraying someone playing a game. Okay. And so to understand the difference, because you're saying, well, no, they're not, the whatever Jim from Critical Role is just and Matt Mercer is really Matt Mercer, right? And so they're not playing a role; they're just playing the game. No, they're not. In the same way that, like, let's say, I don't know, Tom Cruise. Well, Tom Cruise is a bad example, maybe because he's nuts all the time, right? But I don't know. Let's say Penelope Cruz, right? Penelope Cruz goes in a movie. She acts in this movie. She's portraying a character, right? She's portraying whatever, Wilma Flintstone or something, right? And so she's playing the character Wilma Flintstone. There, she's playing a part. Then she goes on the Tonight Show to be interviewed about playing Wilma Flintstone. She's not Penelope Cruz in that interview. She is putting on a stage face. She is the celebrity Penelope Cruz putting on an act of who she is in this stage play, right? of being on the Tonight Show, right? It is another form of acting, right? So she's playing herself, but in a different way than she would if she was just hanging out with friends. That's not her authentic self. That's a stage presentation. That's what politicians do, that celebrities, almost everybody who has to do public performance does in certain ways, right? She's putting on a mask. And in Critical Role, at the very least, that's what those people are doing. They're putting on a mask. But furthermore, what they're doing, I am pretty convinced, is a form of improv acting, where they are without a doubt given cues of what the different things that are going to happen in the session are going to be about, so that they know how to act exaggeratedly excited or exaggeratedly surprised or exaggeratedly tense, right? Which is all very obvious overacting, because again, these people, somebody said, oh, they're voice actors. You can't expect them to live up to. Well, they became voice actors because they're not good actors, right? So they're not very good actors. So you can tell that a lot of the emoting is false. All their fake excitement, fake sadness, fake happiness, fake nervousness, whatever in the show is fake, right? It's exaggerated for the screen, for the camera. And people would watch that and think it's real. And I did a video a long time ago that, Critical Role is to RPGs what porn is to sex, right? Like, it's the same thing. It's like if you get a teenager who's he's never done it, he watches porn and he thinks that must be what sex is like. And it's, anybody who's watched porn and actually had sex knows that they're not the same, right? One is a stage performance and the other one is not, So they are not the same. So like and that was a big part of the problem, is that a bunch of people came in thinking that playing a normal D&D session is like being on Critical Role, and it's not. And so it created a lot of unattainable expectations. And so that was one problem. But the second one is that it also created a set of behaviors that were then ported into regular play, that were kind of forced into regular play, which is to say the kind of theater kid style of play. And that theater kid style of play also increased I'm not saying it's the only thing that brought them in, because there have been theater kids at least since the time of Vampire the Masquerade that are role players, right? But it brought a higher level of influence to the leftist theater kid crowd, right? Because suddenly people wanted to have these games that had a lot of like emotive role playing and talking in the first person and the kind of the improv acting. It's like lazy LARPing, you could call it, right? Like you're not. Well, some people might even be dressing up, but you're probably not dressing up and you're still sitting on the sofa, but you're otherwise pretending that you're the character there, right? And stuff like that. And it brought in this higher influence on this kind of story-based gaming, not story gaming, but story-based gaming, of the DM being the wonderful, brilliant manager of this epic tale, which we had fought so hard for decades to say, no, that's garbage. That's not the way to run the game. The DM is not the author or the director of the movie, and the point is not for him to tell you his marvelous story and for you to be, just this character that reacts to it or something. That's not the way role playing is supposed to be done. And instead that made it more that way, right? So all of those were problems. And so this also, I think, led to the pressure of Critical Role helped inside WotC to give more influence and power to the woke people who were saying, no, RPGs shouldn't be about like dungeon crawling and, or overland adventures or even necessarily about fighting evil, right? It should be about being a barista in a magical college where you're a hot mess and go to the prom, right? And in any other time, anyone suggesting that to the people in charge of Dungeons and Dragons would have been laughed out of the room and probably fired. But garbage like Fritzhaven came out because these people had this undue influence, and because they thought, well, the people like Critical Role, they might like this. They might like the whimsical adventure through an enchanted fairground, right? They might like the eat, pray, love journey through the night market of fantasy Thailand while you're looking to find yourself in the multiversal, multicultural place where there's no white people, right? Like all of those things got emphasized because of Critical Role, So there's all of that. All of that helped to combine. And so there's a before and after Critical Role where you see the quality of WotC's products collapse, right? Like they just go downhill in this ever accelerating domino effect, this slippery slope, James Gang, $5 super chat. Buy yourself some cervezas. I assume you were meant to say cervezas. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'll also get another tin of tuna for the meatball. I think that's 8 now. 8 tins of tuna for meatball. Thank you, guys. So this is the reason why Matt Mercer damaged the hobby, right? And I don't think he set out to he's not Snidely Whiplash out to destroy the gaming hobby necessarily. I think that he's a guy I think that he's probably, because he's a theater kid, he's probably a story gamer at heart, and he probably his sessions that he did, because people always say, oh no, but this was a real gaming group. Yeah, it might have been a real gaming group. It was a real gaming group full of actors that as soon as they saw a chance to make money off it, started being actors more than gamers, right? But I'm sure that their real sessions, as it were, are also full of overacting and full of ridiculous Mercer plot lines and trash like that, right? That it was probably bad to begin with, but he did it because for personal gain, right? This was the way for him and for his buddies. They're a group of friends, right? I know that they start as a group of friends, for all of them to make money and to become more famous as actors. I don't think any of them are ever going to become big scale actors because they're all pretty horrible. But this is as close as they're going to get, right? Like they're famous. That's what every actor wants to be famous, and now they're micro famous in the hobby at least, and so that to them is a huge win for people that have probably spent the better part of their adult lives waiting tables, we hope, or worse, while they had these fantasies of becoming an Academy Award winner, so that is the collection of all the garbage of Matt Mercer, right? And Matt Mercer has, of course, encouraged this hardcore left coast politics to thrive further than it would have without him in the hobby. There's another part that is a problem. In general, in the history of the RPG hobby, there were two figures that you could say, or two types of people that you could say were the determining people of the hobby. The first would have been the game designers, the people that wrote the games, right? Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, Jackson, Sandy Peterson, whoever, right? All these people, right? Eric Wujik and Kevin Siembiada, etc. And the other would be the DMs, right? Those are the people that were the important people of the hobby, right? DMs in some places could become local celebrities if they were really good DMs, and game designers could become very well known, and you would look to them for guidance in the hobby in terms of everything from resolving rules disputes to, you know, running campaigns and all this sort of stuff, right? So it was the game designers and the DMs. Those were the people, because it was a hobby of playing games. So it made sense, right? The people that design the game and the people that run the game are the people of influence. And that was true up to the time the Critical Role came along. Because after that, in the 5e part of the hobby anyways, which they began to call a community, because the community also means that you'd have a whole bunch of people who never played or almost never played that should be given equal weight or more weight if they're higher on the progressive stack than people who've been gaming for 30 years or designing games for 30 years, right? And we know for a fact, because the study was done of the thing, that, you know, more than half of people who watch Critical Role have never played D&D and have no interest in ever playing D&D. But they were suddenly part of the D&D community and felt that they could be in charge of deciding what is best or who should be allowed or not allowed in the D&D community, right? And that also bled over into WotC, where suddenly, like the last couple of products they made, a large number of the writers of those products are people who either just barely started playing D&D or had never played D&D when they were hired by WotC, and they are hired for progressive reasons, you know, and they have no experience in doing these things, right? So at that moment, after Critical Role, you started seeing that there was this shift where the main people, because before that, you had people in 5e were asking Mike Merles or asking Jeremy Crawford, who's not a great guy, but whatever. He's still a guy that knew how to write the technical parts of other people's ideas, at least, right? So he was Jeremy Crawford looks like a giant compared to the people that are mostly in WotC today, right? Even though compared to Mike Merles, he's a dwarf, right? And compared to I don't know, Eric Wujik, he's an amoeba. But anyway, they were asking those people about, you know, they were looking to them to tell them about how to do gaming, right? Or they were looking to DMs. And after that, they started looking to influencers, to people on YouTube who are not game designers, who may have been gamers for a while, but a lot of them aren't, right? Like one of the most famous influencers, Ginny D, is a moderately attractive woman. I'm not saying she's ugly, right? But she's not a bombshell, right? She's the classic nerd queen bee, right? Like where you have women that hang around nerd groups because they're not ugly, but they're also not, you know, drop dead gorgeous, and they know that they will be surrounded by adoring men who will simp for them, right? And well, Ginny D became a massive phenomenon when she had only been playing D&D for like 6 months, right? And so she knows almost nothing about the hobby, but she became a person that more people listened to than Mike Merles or even Jeremy Crawford, right? And that was also, I believe, a direct product of Critical Role, because people started listening before even they'd start listening to people like Ginny D or all these other YouTube influencers who do not actually design games, including Matt Mercer, right? They were listening to Matt Mercer and to the other people from Critical Role, right? And we know that they're not good game designers because generally the games that they make are crap, as was Camera Obscura, right? Because eventually they think, oh, well, I should make my own game, right? Because they begin to believe that because they have a big YouTube channel, it means they're obviously going to be great game designers because they have millions of adoring fans. How could, you know, everything they say about D&D must be right, you know? So like, how could they not be? And then they make garbage. And yeah, so that is another major problem, because that is spilled over in other places, including in the OSR, right? Like there are people in the OSR who are now, and I mean, I don't want to disparage all of them, because luckily in the OSR you have some people that at least have, a lot of the OSR people who are influencers are people who have at least been playing for a good long while, right? But it's still an issue, right? Because as soon as it becomes more about the person who's a good YouTube personality, and I mean, I hope I'm a relatively good YouTube personality, but that's not my number one job. My number one job is I'm a game designer. That's where I make my money, right? So, you know, there are some that are very good, right? Like I watch some of the channels, and a lot of the channels of people who have not made games are still good. And some of them maybe later start making games, like I guess the Basic Expert did. But it's still a problem when you have people who primarily see themselves as YouTube influencers being the ones who end up driving the direction of any movement, including the OSR, right? Because that ends up deviating, especially the OSR, though, more so maybe even than D&D, because that ends up deviating from the functionality of the OSR as a design school first and foremost, right? So that is a risky thing, right? Because the OSR, the whole thing that holds it together is that it is a design movement, and that the people who design the OSR games are the ones who are essentially creating what is at the vanguard of the hobby. And if they're not the vanguard of the hobby, then it'll start not being about designing games, it'll be about something else. And that something else, it might be bad, it might not be especially bad, but it might end up fraying the OSR hobby into essentially nothing, into meaninglessness, right? Because if it's not about the old school renaissance, if it's not about the generation of old school based design, then eventually it'll stop being about anything. So yes, those are the reasons why Matt Mercer has been bad for the hobby. He's also apparently a bad human being in general. Anybody who donates $50,000 to essentially to Hamas, to money that everyone knows the proceeds will go to Hamas, is a bad person. Just basically, there's no question about that. Insane Nerd Rambling says, I'm telling you, 1 copper penny equals 1 XP is a better way to deal with RPG money equals XP than gold equals XP. Hang on, I'll answer that in a second. But Jeff Ramdenkar just gave me $5 Canadian. Thank you so much. Are there any companies, designers in the Seattle Matt Mercer side of things that you feel have offered something good to the hobby? Well, before 2014 or so, almost everybody who was in the kind of Seattle scene were still lefties, but they weren't insane. And there was a lot of great stuff that was produced by people who were always openly leftist in the hobby, right? Like even, for example, one of the earliest kind of ideological propagandisms of the hobby that were not just, this is a game that has kind of a particular view because it's part of the fun of the game, but rather was very clearly the author putting a heavy-handed ideological mace into the game that is meant to teach you something, was Blue Rose, right? That was written by Green Ronin. And the people behind Green Ronin were massively leftist, right? And the Blue Rose setting was pretty much garbage. But Green Ronin also produced True 20, which was an incredibly good system of a variant of the D20 system that was really clever, and I said so at the time, even though the people behind, Chris Pramas and Nicole Lindros, despised me, right? But I said it anyways, because I will say that something is good if I see it and it's good, and there were a lot of good games that came out before that. I think the after is the problem, because then the games stopped being about good design and became exclusively about ideological hammering. And so there's relatively very few things these days that are made. I'm not saying there isn't anything, right? There could be some things made by absolutely flaming leftists, right? Like just the most outrageously woke people that might still also be good, by chance, right? But inevitably, any time that you end up placing your ideology above your craft, the craft is what's going to suffer, right? It goes back to the Hank Hill quote, right? Your Christian rock isn't actually making Christianity better; it's just making rock music worse. Like that's how it goes, right? And that's not that is absolutely true, so there's a difference between a game written by someone who's left-wing or a game that has a left-wing theme but is mainly a game, and a game that's purpose is mainly to indoctrinate you in leftism. And it would be the same in rightism, right? racist products like Varg Vikernes made is also garbage because of its ideological leanings. Let's see what other. Oh yeah, there's that question that you said about XP. Okay, so Insane Nerd Ramblings, 1 copper penny equals well, 1 copper penny for 1 XP may be a better way to deal with RPG money. But in Lion and Dragon, what I do is I just put XP for time served, because once you get out of the kind of dungeon crawl, wilderness treasure hunt mode, it makes a lot more sense to just say, well, okay, you're in the session. At the end of the session, everybody gets 1 XP, right? And then that means that with your character, you're not obliged to do anything for meta reasons out of character that your character wouldn't do. And it's especially makes sense in a setting where certain classes shouldn't, for example, be money grubbing, right? Where if you're playing a nobleman, not to say nothing of a member of the clergy, looting a body for 3 pennies so that you'll get so you get 3 more experience points, would be something that would be just completely counter to what that person should be doing, what they would be socially expected to behave in the setting. So, I find that it works really well, because people will still go out looking for treasure, because the money is still worth things in the setting, right? And people will still kill things because things have to be killed in the setting, right? So it's still okay. It'll all happen anyways, right? But then they don't have to make a point of going for certain things just because that's the only way to get experience, all right, so let me think here. What else have we got? Calvin says, for some years, Muslim countries have been purging Jews. Yeah, well, you want to talk about apartheid state? Try being a non-Muslim in any of the Muslim dictatorships throughout the world, right? You want to talk about genocide, or at least ethnic cleansing? Look at the fact that there used to be millions of Jews living in different Muslim nations in the beginning of the 20th century, and by the end of it, there's hardly any, because they were all either killed or forced to flee, So that's a kind of genocide, right? That's a kind of apartheid state. Being a dhimmi in a Muslim country is a kind of apartheid. Double D is here. Hey, Double D. Hope you don't mind my comments on influencers. He says Islamic military prowess was exposed in 1948 and has never recovered. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, the real surprise to a lot of people, which is really funny actually, is that, how did the Egyptians get their asses kicked? And then again, James Gang just gave me a $5 super chat. D&D died when TSR did. So I think that's like 9 or 10 tins of tuna for a meatball now. Thank you very much, guys. So yes, Double D, I totally agree with you. And it's really incredible, because basically the Egyptian government has never won a war, right? They've lost every war they've been in, I think. I don't know if they've had, like, maybe they had some war with some southern neighbor, right? But they every time they fought Israel, until they finally said, okay, screw this, and they were one of the first people to actually make a deal with Israel. RPG Grandma points out, yes, Hamas killed Muslims when they attacked in October. Yeah, they killed Muslims on their way to work, Muslim ambulance workers, Muslim police officers, Muslim soldiers. There are also multiple stories of Muslim paramedics and Muslim soldiers and policemen that ran towards the danger in order to try to protect their fellow Israeli citizens from these attacks, some of whom ended up losing their lives, right? And there are more than a few stories of Muslim Israeli civilians who went out of their way to rescue other Israelis that were being attacked or hunted by Hamas, right? That went and grabbed these people, put them in the van, and took them out of harm's way from from the cities that were being attacked, or the settlements, or from the dance the dance concert, I guess it was. Yeah. So yes. What else are we talking about here? Talking about college debt. Okay. Wayne Brack says, free yourself, become an acolyte of Meatball, and you will free your soul. Venerate the Meatball. Well, I do not worship Meatball. She's just my roommate. You know, she's not my baby. She's not my child substitute. She's a companion. Right? Hangs out in the same space as me, and I feed her. You know, and so she'll have a reason to hang out. You know, and she, you know, she can sleep wherever she wants in the house, and you know, she has a litter box. But you know, she's very independent. She's a super independent cat, and that's fine by me. And you know, we get along very well together. I'm the only human she really likes, actually, because most everybody else, you know, when she was younger, she was mean to every other person, right? My ex, she was kind of okay with, right? But Chungus liked my ex more than she liked me, and Meatball liked me more than she liked my ex, right? But anyway, you know, over the years now, like there are some gamers who have been coming to my house for my games. Well, since before I had this house, right? But like for as long as I've had Meatball, for 14 years, right? And Meatball would never act friendly to them. She would never let them touch her. And then it was like, you know, some of the ones that have been there that have done at least 10 years of time, now she will like let herself be close enough and not act unfriendly, and then let herself be petted by them, right? But it took them like a decade for her to say, very well, you may touch me now. You know, like it's really funny. And it's not like she's not used to being, you know, because I pet her all the time. So she knows petting is nice, but she just doesn't like other people. She hates other cats, other than her sister. I mean, she fought with her sister too, the way sister cats fight, right? But any other cat, she just goes after them, you know. Let me see here. Womanizer says, Old Maid is easier to play than Bridge. Simple isn't always better. I suppose that's a suggestion about 5e. I mean, you're right, yes. But I mean, if you're going to make, if part of the point is, like, I was hired to help make an edition that would save WotC's ass after the horrifically bad 4th edition that lost 2/3 of their market, right? And so the goal was make an edition that the most people will want to play. It was not make an edition that's going to be anybody's favorite necessarily, though I'm sure there are a lot of people for whom 5e might be their favorite now. But that was the goal. And the design principles that me and Mike talked about for ages and exchanged hundreds of email over was all set up, and the simplification of the game compared to 3e especially was designed to replace system mastery with this ease of play that would allow for people who are not hardcore rules lawyers or what have you to enter into the game as casuals and not feel like they are being disadvantaged for not knowing how to play the game, which is what happened a lot when some total newbie joined an existing 3e group or 3.5 group, right? And so, yes, Bridge might not be a better game, a worse game than Old Maid. But if you're going to make a game that more people are likely to play, you make Old Maid, right? And it's not a bad game. It's not a terrible game. Anyway, let me see what else people are talking about. The Thethan says, I think partly 5e's success was because of how poor 4e was received. 4e was so off-putting that people wanted a more normal game, and they got that in the form of 5e. Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing, though. By the time 4e collapsed, there was a lot of people who had no special reason to come back. Okay, that it was not in any way a guarantee that they would. right? All the people that went to the OSR, all the people, even more so, that went to Pathfinder, right? And Pathfinder had no sign of necessarily stopping being good, right? So like there was a ton of people, a massive amount of former 3E players who are now playing Pathfinder and had no necessary reason to come back. So there was every possibility that 4E had just killed the franchise, and that was that. You know, and I'm pretty sure that if 5E hadn't been a big success, that would have been the end for D&D, for WotC. They would have shelved it or whatever. They wouldn't have sold it, I think. I think they would have shelved it. But anyway, so I think that it was, what you could say is that once people saw that 5E wasn't going to be the same as 4E, that 5E was much closer to the more traditional version of D&D, and that it was more similar in some ways to 3rd edition than to 4th, and that it also had a lot of kind of old school shout outs, and that it was downplaying a lot of the things that it had people didn't like about 4E, then people might have become more willing to play it, right? But if the initial product had been something as bad as 4E, you know, or had not been as carefully crafted to try to be inviting as 5E is, I'm not sure that it would have done better, you know. Victor says, isn't every RPG improv acting, telling a story together? They're actors, sure, but they know what they're doing. But when I play an RPG character, I put on a mask, don't you? Well, hang on, though, because there's a difference between improv acting in the sense of like the actor skill of improv acting and the element of playing your character, right? Because again, these people are not playing their characters in Critical Role. In Critical Role, they are playing people playing D&D, right? So the improv acting mainly is them improving as the person, right? So if you've got Jim and Joe and Sam at a table, they might, yes, they are acting out usually their character, right? So they're acting out Ragnar, the warrior, and Thimble the thief, and the wizard Melmac or whatever, right? They're playing those characters when they're interpreting the character in the game, but they're not pretending to be Joe, Jim, and Sam playing the RPG, and that is what Critical Role was doing. That's the improv. But also in improv acting, when it's being done professionally, there's a series of pre-made cues, right, that allows people to learn bits and to pre-prepare certain reactions that they're going to make, right? And so yeah, improv acting is a little bit like stage magic, right? Like a stage magic, a lot of times it looks like this incredible trick, like of mind reading or something, but it's sometimes based on cues, right? Or on, you know, certain, whatever, picking the coin or whatever it is, right? And then there are cues that the audience doesn't know that allows the trick to work, right? Improv acting does the same thing when you're doing it in like as a stage show, right? That they might say, okay, anybody from the audience, say something, say a word, right? And even if they don't have a plant in the audience, the person might say the word and they might introduce that word, but then the guy will add something that all the other improv actors know is the cue to go into a bit, right? And they'll do that bit, you know. So this is different than people who are playing an RPG and are playing their character in an RPG. Matthew kind of says Critical Role is doing fake emotions. Yeah, basically, or exaggerated at least. He Who Wants to Know says, I remember Critical Role themselves admitting to that being the case, using improv cues to guide their performance. There you go. Tyro DVD says, made my nephew rewatch a Minecraft video he was laughing at, but only looking at their eyebrows. It revealed a lot that the guys were faking it. Yeah, I mean, you know, acting is quite as good. You have to be a really good actor to be able to act sincere, right? Because there, like a lot of the acting that you see on television is emotive in a way that works, but you know that they're acting, right? So it's not, you don't need to fake sincerity there. What you're doing is a type of emoting that creates the a reaction of the sensation of that emotional experience on to the viewer, right? But to be able to do that is very different from trying to pretend that, like, in such a way that you're trying to convince the person watching that you are really feeling this. You're not just pretending playing someone feeling it. That's a lot harder. Let's see what else here. Wayne Brack says, to be honest, if I had a multi-million-dollar show playing RPGs, I would not let it be free for all unguided. I'd protect the company's interests. It only makes sense to do it. So, well, yeah, no, obviously, I mean, they are business people. That's part of the thing. But a lot of people think that they're not, right? And that is part of the problem. They think, no, these are just wonderful people that are like, I don't know, they think that they're like doing this for charity, or that they're doing it just out of sheer love, and it's not that they're making millions of dollars from it, Hero DVD says, I hate Harry Potter for adding school settings to everything in a sci-fi fantasy. I don't like high school. It's not a good setting. Yeah, well, I was never, I was born too early to be a youthful reader of Harry Potter, so I've never read it. I've never read any of the Harry Potter novels. Some of my nerd friends, most nerd friends of my own generation, Gen X nerds, have read it, even the ones that don't have kids, and they insist that it's a wonderful series and whatever else, and that's great. But yeah, it does have a lot to answer for, Could have been worse too, also, I guess. But yes, it's created that genre that people seem to want to put into everything. Steambub says, what's worse, the Strixhaven book wasn't a setting book. Well, making a setting book is hard. Remember, some of you might not have been here at the start of this live stream. At the start, before I started talking about Matt Mercer, some people asked me about, like, how much do I write? And I explained that even in writing for RPGs, there's a difference between technical writing parts and creative writing parts. So, like, doing stuff like putting together a timeline or making a list of stuff or whatever, that's technical writing. It doesn't really, because it's stuff that you just have to put it into the right order, right? Or copying out basic rules that you already know, right? And you just have to frame them in the right way for the book. And you can do a lot more of that than if you're doing creative writing in a day, right? And here's the thing. These people that now work on these recent books, all of which act as though they're a setting, right? Like Strixhaven pretends to be a setting book. Candlekeep pretended to be a setting book. Radiant Citadel pretended to be a setting book. Ironically, The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, I guess, technically was a setting book, but of a carnival, right? of a very small setting. And I'm sure there's some others that I'm missing there. But anyways, that all of these claim to be a setting book, and then instead they're an anthology of stupid adventures, right? And the reason for that is that a setting book is really hard technical writing. Most of an adventure, except the part where you have to stat out monsters, which they would get a white guy to do most of the time, right, apparently. Like, this book now, the new one or the box set that they're supposed to come out with now, it's merged. It's not a book, of the Book of Many Things. That's going to be like the one that's thematic of the Deck of Many Things, and that they were bragging that it was written by an autistic, non-binary person of color and stuff like that, and that who self-inserts an autistic paladin as the true creator of the Deck of Many Things. Who'd have known? It's supposedly written by her, Mackenzie D'Armas, but in fact, all the technical stuff was done by I think it's Jason Tondro, who is one of the newer people there. That is like literally he's a guy who wrote some Pathfinder stuff but not very much, and mostly just mechanical stuff. And so he's literally the white guy that have to bring in because these DEI hires have never played D&D, they've never designed D&D, they have no idea how to properly do those parts. And so he's actually shadow writing it, right? So, um, the technical parts of making a setting is harder in a way because it means you have to have to make a creative, realistic setting. You have to have a certain amount of knowledge of history, of anthropology. You have to understand, or you have to understand myth, or you have to understand all these things that they're not taught anymore. Nobody below the second half of the millennial generation knows any of this, and nor do they have it instinctively from like what used to be the standard. There are a lot of people that never studied the Bible who are early millennial and up, who still know a whole bunch of Bible stories, right? You never went to church maybe, but you'll still know a bunch of Bible stories because it was an inherent part of Western civilization. Now it isn't anymore, right? So none of those things are things that younger people inherently know, right? They don't inherently know the Arthurian sagas. They don't inherently know the Bible stories. They don't inherently know the Greeks and the Roman gods, right? Because none of these things are going to be taught to them anymore in school, nor are they something that appears regularly in popular culture anymore because it's the common culture had to be deconstructed, right? So they have no idea how to write a setting, and that's why these books have no settings, right? It's a part of that. My Name says the Critical Role made millions. They're aware of paper. They did. They made millions, and they made a few millions, right? They're not the mega rich, I don't think Hollywood's going to be beating down any of their doors, but they made a few $1,000,000, and they also probably had a few $1,000,000 of expenses, but they probably made they made enough profit out of this that all of them probably made more money than they've ever made acting. So there you are. So it is, for them, it's a success. There's no question about it. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Let me see here. Kobenaiser goes, high school, not a good setting. Anime would like a word. Yeah, well, I've never watched much anime, so. World Bigfoot Central, story gamers are just frustrated authors. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the DM's job is not to be a novelist. It's not. And an RPG session isn't like a novel. You're not playing through a novel there. And when you try to do that, it always comes out horribly bad. L says, my name, $12 million Kickstarter for Vox Machina, that they kept the money and sold it to Amazon. Uriah Grant Edwards says, the fact that many of them still don't have a basic understanding of the rules proves that they're more interested in being actors than being gamers. Yeah, well, for sure. And remember, more than half of their audience doesn't care at all about the game. Like, they're watching it the way that somebody else might watch Game of Thrones, right? They're watching it as a show. They don't care about the game. And in fact, those are the people that were furious when one player died in a seemingly stupid way in one game, where I'm guessing that it was a series of die rolls that were not part of the pre-scripted plan, but that's how it turned out. Mentioning this about magical academies and in fantasy, I will repeat in case everyone is wondering, the Invisible College is not an actual college in the game. It's the name of a secret society, which is not a group of teenagers learning magic, right? That is not what the Invisible College is about. Because I've had some people who made that misinterpretation. They're like, oh, is this like Harry Potter? No, it's nothing like Harry Potter. It's not a magic school. It's a secret order of secret agents. fighting in an occult war. And the Invisible College was a real thing. It really existed back in the 17th century. So just like most of my other games, except World of the Last Sun, of course, everything in the Invisible College is at least inspired by authentic history. The bad guys, the good guys, the magic, the monsters, all of it. Some of it is exaggerated, of course. Wayne Brack says, Strixhaven, oh my god, wokest adventure ever. I don't know about that. Radiant Citadel has to come pretty close. But again, that's the point. There's a before and after of WotC products that dates to around when Critical Role became popular, you know. Great Kabuki says, my cousin. Oh, now we're getting into people's family stories related to Critical Role. My cousin became obsessed with Critical Role to the point of judging people for not liking it, almost treating them, myself included, as some sort of subhuman that doesn't understand how stories work. Well, listen, every time I've said something about Matt Mercer, which is almost always something bad, right? Because it's Matt Mercer, or about Critical Role, I have ended up having been brigaded by the critters, which is the name of that Critical Role fans give themselves, and they could be pretty aggressive. I mean, I've been brigaded by just about every piece of garbage in the hobby for the last 20 years, right? So I can put them on scales of just how effective they are as brigaders and just how vicious they are, right? And the Critical Role people can be pretty goddamn vicious when they want to be, you know. It is cult-like, yes. XX Ocarina says, is it weird that I feel it's weird watching people have fun doing what you want to have fun doing? Well, that's the thing, right? Like, I think a lot of regular gamers don't really understand why people would watch someone play RPGs instead of playing it, right? It's like, have you ever been in a gaming group and somebody brings their girlfriend and she doesn't want to play, but she wants to sit there and watch, or some other guy or whatever. Like, there's somebody there who wants to be present at the time but doesn't want to participate. And at least from my perspective, and I think a lot of other gamers have said that, it feels like the whole atmosphere is changed because of the presence of that person. Worse still if it's like, somebody's girlfriend, because then the sexual tension and all that stuff, right? But even if it's like just some rando, another friend who was already there or something, it's like the presence of someone who's not actually doing it, it's not actually being a part of the game, has a dilatory effect on the game experience, I think, right? And so it's weird for people to watch other people play instead of playing themselves if you're a regular gamer. But you have to remember that a small majority of the people watching Critical Role never played the game, so they don't really care about that. They just care about the acting of it, and the humor or whatever, or the costumes they wear, or the amount of genders they name, or whatever, Yosemite Mike says the comics industry hired a bunch of people because of their progressive credentials, or how many boxes they ticked with no experience, are all terrible and everything they do is terrible. Yeah, well, they drove the comics industry into the ground, right? The Western comics industry is basically dead now. Gaming would be too if it wasn't that game rules aren't copyrightable and that the OSR exists, Matthew Sanans says, why is Sage Advice pre-5th edition disliked or not taken seriously, while 5th edition Sage Advice is taken almost seriously as actual rules? Well, it was a really weird fact of the audience of 5th edition, right? That, again, I've told this story many times before, but when Mike and I were working on the concept behind what would be 5e, one of the design points we both very strongly emphasized was modularity, was the idea that there was no rules, that if you took that thing out, then it screwed up a whole bunch of other stuff in the game. In the way that, like, for example, in 3E, if you took out a feat, like just one feat that you didn't think they thought was stupid, but telling that feat is a prerequisite for other feats, and without it, there's the question about how you adjudicate this effect. And so you take out one little thread and the whole fabric of the game has to be rewritten, right? We didn't want something like that. We wanted something that was hugely modifiable. And so the basic rules of 5th edition were made to be super modular, that you could take stuff out, you could add stuff in, and it would work very easily. And the DM's guide was then meant to be a book full of options of how to modify your 5e game. And it is that. If you look at the 5th edition DM's guide, it's full of stuff that you can add as mods, as basically optional changes to the game that you can keep or take away, right? And we thought, our vision of it was that people are going to get these games and that there would be 1,000 points of light, right? That everybody would run the game a little different to fit their particular campaign and their particular group and their likes, and whether it's going to be more, whether there's going to be a higher risk level or a lower risk level, whether the magic is more powerful or less powerful, whether, all these different things that could change, getting rid of entire classes, adding new ones, changing how classes work, all of that, right? Any mod imaginable, and it would still be, coming out of the 5e rule set. The problem was our audience was basically millennials and late millennials, right? And late millennials have no idea how to do anything, and so they desperately look for being told what to do. It's why they're so vulnerable to wokeism, and it's also why they decided to take the answer person of WotC, which unfortunately became Jeremy Crawford, because otherwise no one would know who he was if it hadn't been for that, right? They took anything he said as sacred writ, as much as the rules themselves, right? And they didn't want to figure it out for themselves. They didn't even want to figure out how to adjudicate a rule, never mind change the entire system to mod it for their particular game, right? So that is the biggest failure from our point of view of 5th edition, is that it didn't end up being used the way it was meant to be used. It was meant to be a game that everybody could modify in crazily interesting ways, in the same way that people modify the basic D&D rules in the OSR, right? That was the inspiration for it. So it was terrible that didn't come to pass, because the crowd that bought it was not the right people for that. We should have known, but we didn't think. To be fair, we hadn't seen peak millennial crap at that point yet. James Gang says Jenny D is a hard 3 at best, and I will stand by that. 12D Gesture says, I like how Jenny D got more views on her one video on solo gaming than Geek Gamers did, even though she was one of the first YouTubers about it. Jenny D is queen of the simps, says Brother Grognard. L says, Pundit, Jenny D is the girl from Mean Girls that tries to make fetch happen. Keith Lightminder says, are we to judge you on appearances now too? Well, shit, I hope not. First of all, I'm not looking to hook up with anyone. I'm not looking for anyone. I don't think, I would suspect, I'm not 100% sure, you never know, but I would suspect that I've never ever had anyone watch one of my videos where I'm showing my face and say, damn, the RPG Pundit is handsome, I'm going to subscribe just because of what a good looking guy he is, or something like that. I really doubt that. I imagine very much that is not the case. So no, you don't judge me on appearances, but most of the times you don't judge men by appearances in most contexts. But it's different for women, right? And it's different, especially for women that become part of a male-dominated space, right? Ad nauseum says, but I like old Vampire the Masquerade. Well, yeah, sure, but old Vampire the Masquerade added in theater kids. That's just the truth of the matter. You've got to accept that, man. The vampire has a lot to answer for too, in other words. Where Where are we now? Oh, geez, I think I just lost a bunch of the text. All right, I'll keep going from where I am now, which is at the very top again. Calvinani says Sweet Baby Inc. is on the room. I know what Sweet Baby Inc. is now, but I'm not sure in what way they're on the room. Big Floofy Cat says Savinelli pipes are OSR. Stop the hate. All right, if you say so. Zen Gunman says all message fiction is boring, no exceptions. I guess. I mean, religious holy books aren't boring. I think. I think that they're incredibly fascinating. Mythology isn't boring, and I guess technically those are message fiction. Some philosophical texts aren't boring, and those could also be thought of as message fiction. But I guess they're not fiction in the sense that you mean. You mean like novels, right, and TV shows. You mean in the modern sense. So fair enough. Let's see what else. My name says, yeah, LND definitely wouldn't work with GP equals XP, LOL. Correct. Though you could mod it to do that if you're not playing it in a really medieval authentic environment where certain people weren't expected to go around, looting treasure. Tiro DVD says there were 2 million Christians in Iraq in 2000. There were about 600,000 in 2010. Yes, that's right. I mean, that it's not just Jewish populations that have been gradually being exterminated throughout the Middle East. It's all non-Muslim populations. The Yazidis, Jews, Christians, and also communities of Muslim minority groups. Charles says, "Arrived very late to the party. What are you smoking?" I've been very slowly because when I on live streams I have to keep talking, right, and so that does not conduce well to pipe smoking. But so I've been very slowly smoking Argento Natural tonight in this Savinelli Deluxe pipe. Savinelli, no, it's Stanwell Deluxe. Shit, I end up having Savinelli on the brain from that joke. What else? Yosemite Mike says they held their own in 1973. I think that's a big part of why they could talk peace. Then, when they couldn't in 48 or 67, they hadn't so much face. Well, I mean, in all three occasions, Israel kicked the living crap out of the multiple nations that simultaneously attacked them for the purpose of destroying them completely, and Israel won each time. But yes, you could say that the Yom Kippur War. And by the way, this claim that they have to have ceasefire now because it's Ramadan is absolute bullshit. Okay, first, do you know what Arabs called the 1973 war, or what they called it when they started? They called it the Ramadan War because they attacked during Yom Kippur for the Jews, but it was during Ramadan for them, right? There are a couple of months of the Islamic calendar year where Muslims are not allowed to make war with each other. The month of Ramadan is not one of them. The Prophet Muhammad led armies to conquer cities during months of Ramadan. Okay, there is absolutely no historical or religious law-based argument for claiming that because it's Ramadan, Israel must stop attacking them. And never mind that the October 7th attack was done on a Jewish holiday. It was an intentional attack on them during one of their religious holidays, right? So it is absolutely ridiculous, that claim, but anyway, so the Yom Kippur War, I think the fact that they they managed to do a surprise attack with massive advantage, and then got their asses completely handed to them anyways, was like the final. It was certainly the final straw for Egypt. Egypt said, "Screw this, you know, we're done," you know, and then they started for peace. This situation is actually kind of the opposite. It's that this war has been started because Iran has funded Hezbollah, which they always funded, and Hamas, which they never used to fund, to attack Israel to try to end up disrupting the peace plans that started with the Trump's Abraham Accords that were incredibly successful because they bypassed the problem being Hamas and Hezbollah. Right. And so it gave an incentive to all the other Muslim nations to stop backing those guys, to deal directly with Israel, to make trade deals that are going to be extremely beneficial to all of them. The one group that has the problem with that is Iran, because Iran is Shiite, and Sunni Muslims, who are the majority, hate the Shiites. And they know that if the Sunni Muslim countries aren't distracted with hating and worrying about war with Israel, then they're much more likely to remember how much they hate the Shiites and make war with Iran, right? So this whole thing was an attempt by Iran to try to disrupt the Abraham Accords, which hopefully will come back into play in early 2025 when somebody becomes president again. Looking pretty good right now. Okay, let's see what else people said. My name says, I think I watched 2 or 3 of JD's videos, and that was plenty. XXO Karina says, being in a country and stealing a people's country are 2 different things. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Trying to steal Israel would be very different from living in Israel, if that's what you mean. Victor says, what do you think about the recent movie? How did it impact the hobby in your eyes? I don't think the movie had almost any impact on the hobby. It wasn't successful enough to have an impact on the hobby. I mean, probably there might be a couple of thousand people, maybe, that looked into playing RPGs after they watched that movie that didn't back to playing RPGs, you know. But the effect was absolutely minimal. Wayne Brack says 89 likes, 165 watching. All right. Can we get our beloved pundit to 100 likes? Give a click for Meatball. Yes, please do. It really does help to get a lot of likes for the video. And thank you to everybody who's been watching. We've been going for a good long while now, but I'm still going to keep going for a bit more here, as long as people are willing. And remember, this, you can tell because of the political parts of this live stream that there's a very good chance I'm not going to really be able to get it monetized. So super chats are very welcome. And tonight I have said, you know, I've been inspired by Matt Mercer to give to charity, except I'm going to give to a charity that doesn't want to murder all the Jews. Instead, I'm going to give to probably the greatest charity imaginable. It's called Tuna for Cats. So every single super chat that I receive will go to giving another can of tuna to a needy meatball cat in my immediate area. Okay, so if you want Meatball to get more tuna, you can contribute via the super chat. Meatball will thank you, I am sure. Let me see here. What else have people been saying? Tiro DVD says, so it's like professional wrestling. Yes, professional wrestling gets a lot from improv acting, absolutely. That is completely a correct analysis there. Just Happening Mike says, I don't know why people didn't know this from the beginning. Actors fake it. It's their job. Well, because in part, Critical Role went out of their way to try and pretend that they weren't doing that. They were just like, no, we're just a group of friends. We're just playing. We're playing, man. No, you're not. The second you became even mildly popular, you switched from the authenticity of just playing with your friends to doing an improv show. It's very clear. Dan Gallegos, hey Dan, says, do you ever plan on expansion for Lords of Olympus? Well, in point of fact, Dan, I do not even own Lords of Olympus anymore. As part of the deal that had the Pundit Presents stuff and the Old School Companion and all that be transferred to Spectre Press from Presses Intermedia, which was a very good deal for me. I got paid a very good amount of money to leave Lords of Olympus as something that is fully the property of Presses Intermedia. So Presses Intermedia now owns Lords of Olympus. So they might make source books for it, but I am not. I don't make. If you buy Lords of Olympus now, which it's still fine if you want to buy it, of course, because it was a completely favorable deal, and we were all very happy with it either way. And it's still a very good game. But if you buy Lords of Olympus now, I don't get any royalties from it, unlike almost all of my other games, right? So that is one of the differences. The other product that also went that way is No Murdered, which is also now still fully owned by Presses Intermedia. Let's see what else. Diverging Dragons says, I think the scripting and Critical Role comes between the players, not necessarily with Mercer. It's more like, hey, I'm going to give a soliloquy about X tonight. Why don't you respond with Y? Yeah, there's probably a lot of that too, because that's also a lot of part of improv acting. Improv acting is usually a troupe, right, of about as many people as you have at Critical Role in a lot of cases. And they work out little skits with each other, and they know how to play against each other in different moments and different ways, right? So that means that they don't all have to learn everything. They each learn little things and then cue in and tap into with that particular bit at a certain time. D&D Old Guard says, hello, Pundit in chat, longtime fan, first time seeing a live stream. Oh, that's great. Welcome aboard. My name says Harry Potter sucked. Your DVD says that was an okay series, but there were contradictions in the magic. Okay. Insane Nerd Rambling says, what happened to everyone wanting to be the Fellowship of the Ring, delving the depths of the minds of Moria? Well, I still think there is a lot of that, but I mean, remember, there are a lot of people who are now 5e players that were basically infants, or maybe even not even born when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, right? And they probably haven't read Lord of the Rings, the book, because that's not a book that kids read anymore. They read Harry Potter. Well, no, they don't even read Harry Potter anymore because J.K. Rowling is a TERF, right? So they're not encouraged not to read that. So now all they read are like young adult novels about bold teenage girls with magical powers defying oppressive white male regimes. Okay, so that is what the next generation is going to be inspired by, right? So God help us all. This Oda Manjiro says, I feel like following the format of the old Gazetteers gets one a serviceable setting product. Not necessarily good, but actually an actual setting book for sure. Well, yeah, I think the Gazetteers famously, the areas of the Mystara, the game setting, were created at different times and different moments and different stages. And that's very similar to how I ended up creating the World of the Last Sun. It all appears in the one book, in the World of the Last Sun book, but that's only because I only put out that book. By the time World of the Last Sun, the book came out, I'd been running that campaign for 6 years, right? So
Those were all the established parts of the world at that point. At this point, I could probably do another setting book for it if I really wanted to. I don't know if I will though, because I think one is probably enough there. You never know. Maybe given time, I'll eventually do additional stuff. I'll probably end up doing some Last Sun stuff for Pundit Files. Those will probably be coming at some point or another. Let me see what else. Diversity Dragon says Tondro was pro Paizo union and then dumped them for a non-union gig with WotC. Yeah, well, there you have it. You know, that whole unionizing thing is just ridiculous. These people, like, they want to pretend they're coal miners or something, which is ironic because very soon a bunch of them are also going to have to learn how to code. Fook says, in regard to world building, I found that easier than game mechanics. And again, I do study God's Legend history, etc. Yeah, the thing is, when we're talking about game mechanics, okay, it's very easy to make game mechanics from scratch. It's very hard to make game mechanics that are actually going to be really good from scratch. And in the context of the D&D writing, you don't really have to worry about making game mechanics because most of the game mechanics are already made, right? But being able to put together, you know, stat blocks and stuff, that's stuff that they're just not going to care about doing. And they're not going to know. They don't even know enough to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if there are people actively writing for D&D or were actively writing for D&D up to the end of 2023. A lot of them might have been fired now for all I know, but at least until that point, that there were people actively writing for D&D who, if you gave them a stat block, would not, you know, one with abbreviations, would not know how to interpret it. They wouldn't actually know what those things are. Okay, that is, I'd bet hard money that there was at least a couple of people there that were like that. And that would refuse to want to learn, right? Because they don't give a shit about it. They don't give a shit about the game, you know. They're not there for that. They're there to make diversity money. Brother Grognar says, Tondro is a third-rate talent and a cultural Marxist. That, sir, is a profound misrepresentation. Tondro is at best a fourth-rate talent. What else have we got here? D&D Old Guard says, I had the pleasure and the privilege to interview Margaret Wace when I was in high school. I asked her if the Dragonlance books were actually based on game sessions. She debunked that myth. That's right, it wasn't based on game sessions. The modules were then based on the on the novels, or on their schematics for the novels, but they weren't exactly the same as the novels. Anyway, no, I mean, they were primarily novelists, though both Hickman and Wace were also gamers, right? So it's not quite the same as it's something that's happening today, right? But it was a situation of novelistic thinking entering into old TSR, you know, which did end up causing a lot of problems. And worse still was the problem of, in later on in the second edition period, that they would change game settings based on things that happened in novels that were written by people that maybe didn't actually play at all, you know. But because this big thing happened in Dark Sun, we have to change, the next Dark Sun product changes all this stuff in the setting for the players. And that's quite bad. Let's see what other people have to say here. 12D Jester says, I think Candlekeep was the first harbinger of D&D's degradation. It was a major turning point. By then, I think there were already a couple of products that were warning signs, right? But yeah, Candlekeep was the first of the like, everything from Candlekeep after was crap, right? Like absolute crap. Oh, Jeff Ramdekar, $5 Canadian. Need advice. Working on an OSR style adventure, and my bandits are using poison crossbow bolts. What are good poisons to use against 5th level? Okay, first of all, thank you for the super chat. That's another can of tuna for Meatball. I think she's up to what, 11 now. uh, I'll have to later on show you guys that I've gotten at least 11 cans of tuna there. And then I'll have to do some YouTube short of her enjoying some of that tuna for you guys. So thank you, everyone. As far as your question about what are good poisons to use, the problem is it kind of depends on what style of old school play you are operating from, right? Because if you remember, in like the real old school D&D, poisons were all save or die, right? And they were usually save or instantly die. So you can definitely do that, right? And that's something that it's easy because it applies across all levels, right? So what matters is you do a saving throw versus poison. You fail, you die. You save, you succeed, right? But after that, oh wow, AD&D I think had different poison classes already, and then second edition had more of that, and so gradually there became these different qualities of poison, some of which could just reduce ability scores, some of which could do hit point damage directly, and there was always at least one that was still save or die. Right? I don't know if you've got Lion and Dragon. In Lion and Dragon, I use poisons that are actually based on actual poisons that existed in medieval England, or poisons that were accessible to the medieval English, and tried to make the effects of the poisons mimic what poisons actually do. If you're trying to do something authentic, the issue is that almost no poison kills you very quickly. At least no poisons that are accessible to a medieval pre-industrial society. There were a lot of poisons after, like later on in the real world that can kill you really fast, right? But for a long time, poison was one of the reasons that poison was not used enormously in medieval Europe, especially like in battles, is because contact poison that would not kill you very fast at all, and often would, there were very few that would definitely kill you even. Right. Ingested poisons, there were some that yes, right, because once you ate it, you start feeling sick, and then there's nothing that saves you, right? Even though it'll still take time to do it, right? Like, so a lot of mine are like, foxglove is I'm getting from the book here. So foxglove, you put it in food, the person eats it, starts feeling pain and difficulty breathing. After 10 to 30 minutes, save versus poison to avoid death. But its symptoms are identifiable to doctors, and somebody with a medical skill would know that you could try to induce vomiting or give charcoal or fruit juices to help to nullify it, so you'd get a bonus to your saving throw versus death if they give you that during that time. So there's hardly any normal poison. Now magical poisons are another deal, though, right? Like, so I do have. My player characters know that poisons that they get in the natural world usually are going to have a delayed time before they start to have effect. Then once they have effect, they'll have a delayed time before the problem gets worse, right? And they only do, usually, there are some saving throws, some poisons that have two saving throws, one to see if you're initially affected and then another one to see if you die from it. So you could have like one bad effect and then the possibility of death. But most of them just have one saving throw, and usually it happens after you start to feel certain symptoms that you're not feeling well, that those effects happen automatically, right? Like everybody who eats foxglove will start to feel pain and discomfort and maybe some difficulty breathing, and then to do the saving throw to see if it kills you, right? But magical creatures, because there were stories of that, of course, that, they could have, a manticore sting could perfectly just be save or die instantly, and that's it, right? That makes it extra scary, right? So, for me, I like that concept. I like the idea of having a poison that has timed effects, and to describe in what way it's affecting you, and stuff like that. But it does totally depend on what the question is. What do you want that poison to do? Like, do you want it to be this kind of save or die scenario? Do you want it to disable your characters? Do you want it to have a risk of death, but also possibly some other side effect if you succeed the save, or more than one save, or whatever? So you got to kind of think about it in that sense. It's about what the desired end result is, and do you want it to reflect reality? Of course, if you're talking about authentic play. All right, looking on here. D&D Old Guard says, Margaret Weiss went on to tell me game sessions are impossible to use as a plot. They have multiple climaxes that don't make for a good plot. Characters are ones we played, though. So yeah, I think that's wise words from Margaret Weiss, right? Like the play of it, like RPG play is not like playing a movie or playing a novel, right? RPG play is like when you go fishing, right? Or when you golf, right? There are things that happen that become stories after that, after you're done fishing or golfing, right? But if you're going fishing and you're going, okay, this is our goal today, is to tell a great fishing story. It doesn't work that way, right? The great fishing story is a byproduct of having gone fishing if you're lucky, right? But you can't go fishing with the idea of telling the epic story of you're going fishing, you know. See what else people have to say here. I'm gradually catching up with the chat. I may be skipping some people's comments. I'm sorry, but otherwise I'm going to be here for a really long time. Dan Gashiko says, have you ever had woke players, Pundit? How do you deal with someone who is a wokester trying to put wokeness into your games? It's hard because these people can be friends in other areas. Well, that is a tough question. My answer is I have never really had woke players. If I have, they've been really fucking quiet about it. I have the closest I've had players, like, see, the thing is in South America, wokeness is still relatively more new and less intense. And it's certainly, and it's also a generational thing, right? Because I do have players that are millennial. I've even had players that are Gen Z, but most of my players are kind of Gen Xers, right? Or very early millennials, right? So they're less likely to be woke to begin with. Now, I have had Uruguay being a country with a lot of political diversity that is not the same as it is in North America, where here there are literal old style Marxists, old style, you know, class warfare type communists and what have you, right? I have had players who are quite left wing, right? But my games aren't very left wing, so it doesn't really matter, right? And they're not trying to inject their left wing ideas on the game. In my last Sun campaign, I have a guy who is literally a political activist for the local Trotskyist party. Okay, so very old guard Marxist, right? Full-blown believer in that. He's the guy who plays Heidi, or played Heidi until he died in the game, and now he's currently playing. Well, until this last session, until yesterday, he was playing Hank, the warrior scientist, and now he died, and now he's playing Ichiro, the apocalypse. You know, this guy's an incredible player. He's funny. He plays really well. He's an excellent role player, and the politics never come into it, right? But because he's also not part of the woke left, he's part of the old guard left. When, like, before the game, sometimes we have political discussions, right? And we can talk about it and debate it. He likes to debate, right? Like, you know, no woke person likes to debate. In fact, if you try to debate them, they accuse you of committing a hate crime against them for having disagreed with them, right? Like they want no debate, right? But you know, the old guard guys you can debate with. What I would say is somebody who wants to put wokeness into your game, I guess it depends on the kind of game you're playing, but you know, if what you mean is that they want to change the game to fit their ideological agenda, you know, I wouldn't let anyone do that. I wouldn't let somebody do that for any other political view either, right? Like, the game is about emulation of the setting. And so unless your setting is a setting that has wokeness, I guess if you're playing a modern game and the person wants to play a woke person in the game, they can do that. But but if what they want is to say, well, no, you're not allowed to have anything that isn't woke in the game, that person's got to go. I'm sorry, but I think that's just the reality of it. You can't have them. Can't have them there, you know. Titus Ashadarawesh says, man, I'm really sorry 5e ended up not being what you were trying to make it. But yeah, I am too. I would have loved it if, like, my idea was that the 5e would be, in a sense, like, you know, like the OSR, like that there would be like third-party products of people doing heavy mods of the 5e rules and all that sort of thing, right? Like, I was trying to put that design school concept into the 5e game, but nobody did it. Like, it was just shit, right? Like, nobody went for that. I just couldn't believe it. It is my greatest regret about 5e. RPG Grandma says, "Yep, 5e DMG is full of options. It definitely is. And I insist that the 5e DMG, as far as I'm concerned, is probably the second best DMG after the AD&D first edition DMG. Not counting the rule cyclopedia, of course, because it's technically not a DMG, right? But yeah, it is right up there. It's an excellent book, especially for 5e, right? Like, but sadly enough, I think that it is a book that hardly any 5e players ever open for anything other than maybe the magic items. You know, they don't use anything else in that book. It's very tragic. The 5e Monster Manual, which I had very little to do with, is also pretty good, right? Like the way it works. I think it's better, definitely better than the 4e and the 3e Monster Manuals. And I'd say that having done almost no work on the Monster Manual. I was like asked to glance at it, and that I said, "Yeah, well, yeah, this is actually really good. You know, it's very clever." What else have we got here? Shit. Where did that go now? It's done another leap. Oh my god, I am so far behind. This is insane. Well, I'm working on it here. I'm catching up. There we go. Wayne Brack says, anyone who buys WotC products who claims to not like woke is a supporter of what they claim they don't like, but they really don't care exists. You're still supporting the company. I think, again, Wayne, part of the problem is that a lot of nerds are obsessive compulsive, or, you know, spurgy, or whatever you want to say, right? And they become obsessed with collecting, and they feel like they have to have it all, right? Like, the same thing happened in comics. It took ages, right? Like ages of comic, the people at Marvel and DC destroying every single thing that any comic fan would like about comics for those comics to finally go broke, right? Because there were people that were like, "Oh God, I hate this run of you know, whatever, Green Arrow, but I have to have them all, you know, like, because it says Green Arrow there, I have to buy it," right? Like the people went to watch Star Wars after The Force Awakens. And I was like, well, yeah, but it's Star Wars. I have to see. How could I not see Star Wars? It's Star Wars. It's official. I have to see it, right? And they knew it was going to be trash, but they had to do it anyways because it was like their nature. They could not help but go see it, right? And it's the same thing with D&D. There are people that are still buying D&D books because it's the official D&D. And what else are they going to do, right? Like, these are not the people that go to the OSR. Well, some of them are. Some of them get into the OSR and then still do this shit. It's crazy, but it's true. Part Shooter, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. I've never seen you till 1 minute ago or know what the hell y'all are talking about, but here's $10. Make someone smile tomorrow. Well, thank you, Parts. I guess you just got here. I will mention to you that tonight I've been encouraging people to do super chats. Every super chat goes to my charity of choice, which is not Hamas like it is for Matt Mercer, but rather it is the Tuna for Meatballs Fund, which is to say, for every super chat I get, I'm obliged to buy another tin of tuna for Meatball. And I think we're now up to number 12, I think. 12 or 13, I don't remember. I'll have to check. So I thank you, and Meatball thanks you. What else have we got here? All right, continuing to desperately try to catch up. Tiro DVD says, another lesson for my nephew. The shittier a YouTube video, the more accurate the information. If it's a super slick video and not a gamer, it's fake. Well, my videos are about as lo-fi as it gets, so I appreciate that, Tyro. You do not get shittier production values than the RPG Pundit. David Brown says Pundit looks dope with his Frodo pipe. This is not really a Frodo pipe. It's too short to be a Frodo pipe. You'd have to get to at least something this size to be a Frodo pipe. But thank you anyways for saying I look dope. McDougall says, what pisses me off about 5e is how the monsters are changed. The world's more touchy-feely and everyone is BS, misunderstood BS. Look at what they did with orcs and goblins. Yeah, but McDougall, if you look at the original monster manual, that's not there. It's not like that. That's all crap that came later, mostly after the Critical Role period started, you know. The whole thing of, you know, drow are mostly good, which is now official canon for WotC D&D. Beholders can be lawful good, and so can mind flayers. That came around the time of Candlekeep, you know. So all of that nonsense, and the fact that they're like, we're going to get rid of alignment because alignment suggests that there's absolute good and evil, and we don't believe in that. You know, that's all stuff that came way after the original 5e. The thing that we did have, like by 5e, was kind of like, oh, tieflings are, you know, potentially good and misunderstood, and they, you know, they took a lot of, you know, tieflings because they were popular for people to play, but didn't necessarily like the part of them having to struggle with their demonic nature. They started getting rid of that even, like, you know, way before 5th edition. D&D Old Guard says, I'm a Peterson pipe guy myself. Well, you know, Peterson and Stanwells are kind of parallel. They're at the same price level. They're at the same quality level, more or less. But I was always way more of a Stanwell fan than a Peterson fan. But recently, I was gifted an incredibly good Peterson pipe. And then I was, and then I picked up a really amazing Peterson pipe. I was gifted I was gifted a very large Peterson poker. I don't know where I've got it right now, but I think, oh, here it is. It's enormous. And then I ended up finding a Peterson that was a natural. Like, you see, most pipes are either, I guess you'd say, painted in a way, or at the very least, they are covered with a kind of gloss that is meant to be protective. But there are some very high-end pipes that are made natural that this, when it started, was like very, very pale, almost beige brown, right? And then gradually, as you smoke it, it darkens up, and it's got a military bit. And so those two Peterson pipes have started changing my mind about Peterson in a big way, because I always felt that of the two, they were very close, but Stanwell, as a general rule, were better, but Peterson is pretty nice. At least the higher end Petersons, like those two, are pretty nice. Solomon Kane says, I admit my daughter joined a D&D club at the height of Critical Role 2016-ish. She knew I had an AD&D and second ebooks. It got me back into the hobby, played some 5e, but left it for the OSR. So there you go. Solomon Kane is somebody who, because of Critical Role, ended up becoming a real gamer again. You know, he used to be, but then he became one again. And I guess that is one example, one tiny, like the weight of Mercer's crimes dwarf it, but but that is one example of how Critical Role did have some potential good effect, right? Slinger says, learned the art my grandfather knew, talking while smoking. You can only understand every third word, but you can get just out. Well, it's not hard to talk and smoke at the same time, but the problem is it's the time delay, because in a video like this, I'm constantly talking. It doesn't give me time to puff and therefore keep it lit, you know. See, it's gone out again. McDougall says, I always found elves more alien than humans can relate to goblin. To be honest, humans can relate to goblins and dwarves than long-lived elves. Well, you know, in Lion and Dragon, there are no playable non-human classes, and the monsters are all from mythology, and all the monsters, including the intelligent ones, are deeply alien. The elves, which are presented in Lion and Dragon, and you get a lot more info on the elves in Cults of Chaos, are freaky, scary, alien type. You know, they're immortal fairy beings of magic, right? And so they do not behave like Legolas does. Never mind like most elves in D&D settings nowadays do, where they're just a guy with pointy ears, right? So if you like that kind of thing, check out Lion and Dragon. Copenhagen says that the Brandon regime funded Iran. Yeah, they gave, you know, Obama wanted to give them billions of dollars. Trump stopped it. And then Biden did it. He gave them billions of dollars, you know. It's ridiculous. You know, also the Houthis. The Houthis were a massive problem at the end of Obama's term, the beginning of Trump. Trump made nice with the Saudis. The Houthis were a big problem for them, so he backed them. He, instead of, you know, doing what some other people had done and would have sent a bunch of Americans to go fight the Houthis, Trump said, "Okay, yeah, they're a problem for you. We're gonna give you some help, some backup, not troops, but support, and we've got your back. Go and deal with them." And the Saudi Arabians went there and started fighting the Houthis, and the Houthis stopped being a problem. And then the moment that Biden became president, he rescinded the relationship with the Saudis. He condemned them. He stopped giving them support, and the Saudis pulled back, and the Houthis became the big problem again. You know, the amount of, you know, the idea of like, you know, now we have the grown-ups in charge again when Biden won. It's insane because they've screwed up. The most offensive thing about the managerial class is that they're all a gang of incompetents. You know, they're completely incompetent. Because it would be one thing if you had a managerial class that were full of really, really capable people, you know, which is why for a long time you had, you know, like the establishment, the British establishment of the British Empire, right? The establishment in the United States for a very long time had mostly very competent people in it, right? Or enough very competent people that they could get things done, right? But now you have it, they're all incompetents, right? And they don't even care about being competent because they have no vested interest. You know, they have no skin in the game themselves, right? They don't even have an interest in the welfare of their own nation, you know. Never mind protecting strategic interests or things like that. So that they sell out their own nation. Lloyd Sathar says Hamas is the textbook example of when your brother cheap shots you and then starts crying when mom and dad show up. Yeah. Frank Destrosa says, what would you recommend that's similar to Argento Natural that is readily available internationally? Well, hard to say. I mean, there are, it's a kind of unusual tobacco because it's a burley. Like burley is generally seen as a slightly less desirable type of tobacco from Virginia tobacco because it's more coarse. It's got an intense flavor, but it's also not as regular as Virginia can be. And so there are a lot of pipe tobaccos that are pure Virginia tobacco, for example, but there aren't a lot that are pure burley. But the ones that are, it tends to be because they do it really, really well. You know, but most of those end up being really expensive luxury tobaccos, right? Argento Natural, what it has is that it's made in Argentina and it's dirt cheap, and yet it's like it's the tobacco I smoke the most nowadays. I absolutely love it, but it's just burley. It's got nothing else in it. It's just a really well cultivated burley tobacco with no chemical products, no flavoring, no other mixtures, no other tobaccos mixed in with it. And unfortunately, that's hard to find, you know. I know that in some tobacco shops you could get like the bases, and so you could get just pure burley if you wanted to, but some of those are not going to be necessarily good quality. I don't know. Some of them could be. But it won't taste exactly like this. Jeff Ramdencar says, how big is the RPG industry hobby in Israel anyhow? I'm not sure. I mean, I've met Israelis who game, so there is a hobby. I have no idea what it's like there. Insane Nerd Rowling says the D&D movie should have been dead serious like Lord of the Rings instead of some stupid laugh/member berries fest. Well, they tried to make it like a Marvel movie, and that was a bad idea, I think. I'm not sure if it should have been like Lords of the Rings exactly, but the problem is the whole concept of a D&D movie is not really a functional thing, or it shouldn't be anyways, right? Like, you can do a movie, a Dragonlance movie, you could do that. You could do a Forgotten Realms, you could do a movie about any of the settings at the very least, but certainly about the ones that have like a novel cycle, right? Like you could do the Icewind Dale saga or the Dragonlance novels, but they would be movies of those novels in those settings that come from D&D, and so they'd have some of the D&D elements, right? Or you could even do a movie that is set in a particular D&D setting, and it's about that setting and the things in it, right? But D&D itself is not a D&D is not a literary thing, right? So it's a game, right? It's like if you do baseball the movie, right? Like you could do tons of movies about baseball games, right? Or about baseball as a game, or about famous historical baseball players or things like that. But I mean, I never thought that D&D would do well as a movie, anyways. They were I think they were kidding themselves when Hasbro thought that movies would be a big thing for them. But taking settings and making sure, like apparently they were going to do a Dragonlance show and then it got canceled. But there's a good chance that the Dragonlance show could have done well if it was run well and if it wasn't wokeified and if they got actually good actors. But all of those things are huge stumbling blocks for people who aren't movie studios. Insane and Rambling says, too many dumbasses don't grasp the alignment solely has to do with how you align with the Outer Realms. Well, yeah, I guess in one sense, but I mean, originally, before there were Outer Realms, the old school alignment was that you either serve law or chaos or neutrality, right? As concepts, as philosophical concepts, you could say. And that's borrowed from Moorcock mainly, I think. And yeah, so the thing about like in Lion and Dragon, what I say about alignment is that because I use the law chaos neutrality thing, right? And I'd say that the majority of people are just neutral, right? They don't have very strong philosophical positions about the relative virtues of structure versus freedom. And then lawful people are people that have great belief in structure and in order, in rules and civilization. They might still be bad people, or they could be really good people, right? And same thing with chaos. Chaos believes in liberty and the individual, on taking the place above that of structure and order. And some of them could be awful people, and some of them could be good people, right? What else have we got here? David Brown says, damn you, heck, Diversity and Dragons, for telling us to watch that Mermaid Ginny D junk. I'm a weaker person for it. I don't think I've ever seen that, and I have no intention of doing so. Especially now. Thank you for the warning. Insane Nerd Rally says, I mean, alignment languages were a cue. Yeah, I never quite got the point of alignment languages, to be honest. I've never liked using them in my games. Thieves' Cant was real, but Thieves' Cant, what Thieves' Cant should sound like is like what like a special secret code, right? It's like what carnival barkers still use today, right? Like when you hear someone in a carnival say, "Hey Rube," it means that they're having a problem with one of the customers, and it was like trying to assault them or something, and everybody should come to his rescue or stuff like that, right? Nobody else who heard that would understand it, but all the carny folk do, right? And you still get that all over in gang, the way that gangs speak, right? Like that sort of stuff, where you can say something that the people in authority and regular civilians won't understand, but you do, right? So it's actually a code language. It shouldn't be like its own language. So it can make use of language manipulation, like of reversing words or things like that. Like Cockney rhyming slang was a type of cant, right? I did an article about this for an issue of Mad Scribe magazine. All right, what else have we got? So they said, didn't Hasbro Watsy already fired the entire printed book department for Christmas? Yes. Well, before that they severed their deal with Penguin, which was the distributor of all of their books to major big box bookstores, and then they fired their VP for publishing. So they don't have anyone in charge of doing publishing now, right? So the books and products that are going to come out now are going to come out as merchandise, right? It's part of the merch department, not the book publishing, and obviously that implies that there's going to be way less of them in the future, right? Like instead of publishing the books physically, they're going to be published as products for the VTT, because that's their goal. They want everyone to go to the VTT. Then if you're selling printed books, you're going against that code. You do want to sell some special edition things for like the collectors, because that can make you money, but the idea of regular printed stuff is not. I think though they're going to drastically cut down on that at least. What else have we got here? Candlekeep came out March 2021. Definitely the downward spiral started then. Yeah, the last 2 years, basically. Yeah. Well, 3 years, I guess now. Yeah, because we're in March of 2024. Yeah. The last 3 years. The last 2 years were the especially bad ones, but it started then. You're right. Some more people talking about poison. Some of you saying stuff that I ended up saying when I answered the question. Lama Del Rey said, "Look at that distinguished gentleman with his pipe." Thank you. Michael Dye says, "Take off your shirt. I'll send a super chat." No, thank you. I'm not James Raggy. Yeah, Calvinoni says this isn't James Raggy's channel. Yeah, but James Raggy, you'd have to pay him to put on a shirt, wouldn't you? That's funny. Silvar Ogre says, "I feel bad for Trotskyists because they're always the first against the wall after the revolution." Yeah. I think if a Trotsky ever won, they wouldn't know what to do. Like they would be totally lost, Matthew says, "How good is the 3.5 DMG?" I didn't think of it as ever being especially good. I think the setting creation stuff in 5e is not as sophisticated as it could be, but it is pretty good. I mean, like, especially for a beginner player, that's super useful. Super useful. RPG Grandma says, I'm not buying new D&Z stuff from WotC if I can score it free or use TSR or WotC third party for sure. That is a good policy. Yosemite Mike says a lot of people don't understand that money sent to Gaza is money sent to Hamas, no matter what they say it is for. Yeah, exactly, because Hamas will hijack every single shipment when it isn't from something like UNRWA that will just give it to them and let them be in charge of it, you know. Your Grand Edward says, how long have you been smoking a pipe? I have now been smoking a pipe for almost 30 years. Frank Destro says, beholders can be good. Yep, officially, yes. They got rid of alignment. They're planning to, yes. Cassie said, oh, do you have a long stem church pipe? Well, that one's only a regular church warden pipe. But I have had in the past ones that were longer than that, but they're really unwieldy. You know, I don't actually like smoking them. You know, I was actually working in a tobacconist at the time that the first Lord of the Rings movie came out. And we had like one or two church wardens that nobody wanted. and then that movie came out and suddenly there were streams of young guys who came in and never smoked a pipe before, and they wanted a pipe, and they demanded it was a church warden. We kept trying to tell them those are not the best pipes to get, but that's what they wanted. And so of course I think that they sold more church wardens that year at that tobacconist than they probably had in the last 20 years put together before that. You know? Aaron P. Aragorn says, whoa, face reveal. Well, Aaron, you're a little behind the times because it's been about a year now that I've been showing my face on here when I do live streams and also on inappropriate characters when I do that, and often when I guest star on other people's YouTube channels. So you just haven't been looking at my live streams, I guess. I find for the videos, it's just easier to focus on some of my books instead, you know, and probably good advertising. But for the live streams, you know, this is the way they function, and it just makes it easier than to point my camera over at a book or something. Because my live streams I usually do up in my office instead of down in my kitchen or my living room where I do my videos. Let's see, what else have people been talking about? Insane Nerd Raveling says Legolas doesn't even act like Legolas. Correct. Janot says, have you commented on Joe Manganiello's Dragonlance project being dumped? I didn't comment on it in a video, but if you want to know my opinion on that is that, I'm sure he was very sincere about it, but the creative vision that he had from there to what could have been the reality of it might have been very different. And in the current environment, there was still a very high risk that if there had ended up being a Dragonlance TV show, for reasons out of his control, it would have been just mangled horribly and wokeified, and I don't know. Flint would end up being a heroic bearded black lesbian dwarf or something like that, and stuff like that. So it probably would have been horrible. The odds of it from his ideas to fulfillment remaining good were still pretty bad. So maybe it's good that that's not happening right now, and maybe it'll happen in a few years and it'll be different. But yeah. Your Grand Edward says, is Lion and Dragon its own system, or is it a supplement that is system at us? No, Lion and Dragon is a system. It has all the rules that you need to run a medieval authentic game, all the details about medieval culture and stuff like that. It has the magic, the monsters. It has in the back appendices that talk about Wilderland adventuring. It has rules on medieval economy, medieval law and justice. So it has a very implied setting, but the setting books for Lion and Dragon are separate, and they are system agnostic for the most part. And those are Dark Albion, which I don't have on hand, which is basically a big 300 and something page setting for playing in a fantasized version of England during the War of the Roses. And Sword and Caravan, which is for playing in the 12th and early 13th centuries during the Third Crusade and between the Third Crusade and the Mongol invasion in the Holy Land and along the Silk Road. And those are both setting books, and they are 95% system agnostic, So, but OSR based, right? Like, so you can use, if you're running an OSR or old school based game, then you'll be able to use those setting books even if you don't get Lion and Dragon. But of course, Lion and Dragon is the ideal system mod. It's an OSR game, so it's based on the old school rules, but it has a lot of modifications that make the whole game experience feel much more authentically medieval. Like I like to say, you might think you've played medieval fantasy, but you probably haven't if you haven't played Lion and Dragon, because playing D&D is not medieval fantasy. It's fantasy based on, I guess, 20th century fantasy novels, right? But it's not actually, there's very little that's actually medieval about it. It's more like Renaissance fair fantasy than medieval fantasy. Dr. Eminem says, can you say happy birthday to my son, Nick Gers? He has autism and would love it. Well, happy birthday, Nick. I don't know what day it is where you are, but you're within one day of Gary Gygax's birthday, isn't it? Yeah, was it? Yes, I guess it's yesterday now. It was International DMs Day, which I believe is on Gary's birthday, if I'm not forgetting myself. Yosemite says, smoking a pipe always looked like a hassle with all the cleaning. When you get used to it, cleaning a pipe takes like 30 seconds, right? But yeah. Necessary Evil says, just notice this. On Gaza's Egyptian borders, the Egyptians put up a 30-foot wall with razor wire to keep the Palestinians out. That's right. And nobody seems to care about that. Egyptians and Jordan doesn't want them. Yeah, well, because in both cases, historically, when they had so-called Palestinians there, which is to say, Yasser Arafat and his buddies, they tried to overthrow the government. In Jordan, there was a major crisis about that. They almost assassinated the king of Jordan. Black September, it was called, right? And like it was a massive war that they had to fight against the PLO, who are trying to overthrow the government and take power in Jordan and make that their Palestinian state, But people today don't know that. They just forget that. Yeah. What else? I thought Necessary Evil says, thought the D&D movie was supposed to be in Forgotten Realms. Yeah, well, it was. It was technically in the Forgotten Realms, right? But it wasn't like a Forgotten Realms adventure. It was like Guardians of the Galaxy Go Medieval, or something like that. Did I just freeze up there? Can you still hear me? Let me know if you can hear me, if I'm still alive here. Okay. Apparently, yes, you can still hear me. I think I just froze up for a second there. Sorry about that. Let's see what else people are talking about. Thieves' Cant is Carney speak, essentially, correct. Also, actors had that too. Palaver, they used to call it. which they got from underground gay culture of the late 19th and early 20th century. Some of the old D&D stuff was kung fu as heck. Yeah, well, it's very clear that the guys at TSR loved kung fu movies. I'm not like Double D here. You're not going to start seeing video clips of some weird 80s movie. Let's see. I might eventually go all kung fu if I do that Song Dynasty setting supplement for Sword and Caravan. We'll see, though. We'll see. Right now, I'm just trying to. I'm waiting out the days until Baptism of Fire finally comes out. It sure has taken its time, but there are unfortunate delays. But we're getting closer and closer every single day. It's getting closer. It's gonna happen soon. I hope. I don't want to give a prediction here. I'm not saying this, but my hope is that maybe even by the end of March, maybe. More likely early April. It always happens with publishing. Always, you always have delays. I should have known by now. I should have learned that. All right. Hey, I think I am finally caught up here. So yeah, I guess I've had my say about what I wanted to say about Matt Mercer, and that is my position on this. Thank you to everybody who's watched. If you have any other last minute questions or topics you want to bring up right now, go ahead and we'll go a little bit more. But if not, I've done 3 hours. That's a long time for a live stream as far as I'm concerned. I remember when I used to do live, like I think the first live stream I did was 25 minutes long, and now it's like 3 hours. My goodness. But there is something to be said about long form video. It has its benefits. And I think we've talked a lot about a lot of very interesting subjects tonight. So yeah, it was pretty good. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I do hope that you will check out my other videos if this is the first time you're here, and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you will be informed of future videos, and check my community, I think it's called, or posts or whatever, because that's where you will find lots of wonderful pictures of Meatball, as well as notices about stuff. And share my videos anywhere that you could possibly share them. And most of all, check out my books, right? Like if you want something that is very different from Critical Role or from late stage 5th edition, my books are about as different as it gets from that, and they're all extremely focused on playability. They're I think very good OSR game design, and I think a lot of people agree because I've got a lot of bestsellers there. And if you're looking for like supplementary stuff, there's a lot of my stuff can be just like anything in the OSR can be very easily ported over. But especially check out it on Drive Through, my Pundit Presents series of PDFs, and now on the Red Room, and only available at the Red Room store, my new series, the Pundit Files. You get a new one every 2 weeks, and they are all about all kinds of different interesting topics. So far, we've had a couple of adventures. We've got a new class for Lion and Dragon, the Renegade Martial Artist, which we're just talking about Kung Fu here. There you go. You've got a Kung Fu character based on historical, authentic sources, right? As always with my Lion and Dragon stuff, that you can use in your Lion and Dragon game, or especially in the Sword and Caravan setting. There are like random table generators for fast NPC generation. There's tables to shake up your campaigns. There's a city guide to the city of Baghdad for Sword and Caravan, but that you could use for anywhere that you wanted to have the city of Baghdad, or for that matter, to make as the template for a fantasy city of the type of culture that you would get the city of Baghdad from. My most recent one right now, as of tonight, is number 6, which is Siege Rules. And that's got rules for running authentic sieges in in a military battle sort of scenario in your campaign, right? And you'll find that the rules there are usable for pretty much any OSR system. And tomorrow there's a new issue out, The Confraternity of Death, which is I think a very interesting medieval authentic adventure. It's based in the city of Coventry, and it involves, well, a set of really gruesome murders that are happening in the city of Coventry that the player characters would have to try to investigate and stop. And there's some very interesting twists in there, So if you're looking for a good adventure, and it's set in the city of Coventry and like the Albion, in medieval England, but again, you could very easily make it set in any, English-like medieval fantasy mid-sized city, right? Like you can very easily port all that stuff over if you're not running it in the setting that it was made for, So be sure to check that out. What else? Let me just see if anyone else has added any last comment here. Matthew Sinas says, "Why don't people here like the animal humanoids in D&D?" Well, I think having those as player characters really, takes away from some of kind of the mythic roots of D&D. Also because furries are weird, right? and I think it removes some sense of seriousness. There are places for animal humanoids in fantasy. It would be in Gonzo fantasy, right? Like, in fact, in my Gonzo Fantasy Companion book, I have an entire chapter that is a generator for making intelligent animals, and I have another entire chapter that is a generator for fantasy races that is based on randomly rolling for these fantasy races that allows you to make unlimited amounts of weird fantasy races, pretty much, that are going to be different from each other. And the core templates include, of course, like animal type humanoids and stuff like that, because in weird fantasy or Gonzo fantasy, animal humanoids are okay, right? Like they're fine. Like the World of Last Sun is full of them. One of my long-term player characters of the campaign is Catboy, who is, a cat humanoid. Another one now is the Lizard Wizard, but he was originally an elf, but he sold his body to a couple of shadow elves who had a transmogrification machine and transported his consciousness into the body of a lizard man. So now he's a lizard man who's a wizard. So I don't know if that technically counts, but when you're playing weird fantasy, you can throw everything in there, right? But if you're trying to make a serious fantasy, you have to kind of think about it. And the problem is, in serious fantasy, non-human races should be really non-human, right? Otherwise, they're just people in drag using the fantasy appearance as a substitute for having an actual personality, right? This is why I say, like in my serious fantasy campaigns, most of the time, unless like if I'm running Tonisborg, right, which I am right now, which is using like it's an old school rules, and it's a classic D&D dungeon, then yeah, you've got dwarves and you've got halflings and you've got elves, right? And that's okay there, right? But in a lot of settings, it's probably better to just say, well, just be humans, like, and that way you can make the non-humans weirder than, instead of making them they're just humans with, with fur or something, or humans with pointy ears, right? There's no point in that. Make it more mythic and epic if it's straight fantasy, right? And if you're doing weird fantasy, that's another thing. Victor says, "I had a good time asking questions. Thanks for not evading them and sharing your thoughts." Well, that's what I love about the live chat. Like I'm always deeply grateful for my subscribers and people who come to watch my stuff and all of that, because I know that you don't have to do this, right? You're doing it hopefully because you like me, right? And so I'm not going to be one of these guys who's going to like try to lord it above you or something like that. Like On the contrary, I want to hear what you guys want to say and what you want to, what topics you want me to talk about. And in live streams, we're doing that, second to second, right? So like that's why I could never do the thing that I've seen other channels do, where they only answer super chats, right? Because if I see a cool question, I'm going to want to answer it and want to talk about it. And that's great, and that's what I love about the opportunity that you have to do this via YouTube and things like the comments and the chat. It's really cool. Covenant says, why date a tiefling when you could have a succubus girlfriend? Well, if you did, there'd be a risk you'd end up making a tiefling, wouldn't you? But okay. All right, so I think, hang on, there's more stuff. You guys are writing like mad. Well, there's still 135 people watching. My God, those are fantastic numbers. Also, like, I'm pretty amazed. Like, I always think, well, my live streams aren't as popular as my videos, but actually that's not true, right? Because at the time of watching, first of all, I get tons of people watching. And when I compare it, like, there are other channels that do live streams every single week. And when I look at their numbers, I'm like, what are you doing, right? Like, but mine, like, they end up getting quite a lot of views. Like, I guess on average, they get slightly less than my biggest hit videos, which tend to be the ones where I rant about WotC, but they still get a ton of views, and that's wonderful. And thank you so much to all of you. Right? Like, my career depends on you guys, and I'm very grateful to you guys for that, and I always will be. And I never take it for granted that you'll buy what I tell you to like, or something like that. Like that attitude that some game designers get when they get errors in their head. Like, it's just crazy. All right. Hey, Meatball. Coming to say goodbye to people. Meatball wants to thank all of you guys for the tuna. She's very grateful for that. She's not that grateful that I just picked her up, but here she is to say goodbye. Oh, there she goes again. She really does not like to be held that way. Sorry, Meatball. Well, there she is, the top of the chair cat. She always likes to be up there. So Meatball, thanks you guys for all the tuna that your super chats are giving her. I believe it was 13 cans. I promised for every super chat I'm giving a can of tuna to Meatball. So thank you for supporting the Tuna for Meatballs charity instead of supporting Hamas like Critical Role fans do. Wonderful. All right, guys. I think that's about it. I think we've talked it out. So again, thank you again. Share the video. I don't have it on. I think I do already have it there. Yeah. So if you expand the description of this live stream, you will see there links to all of my products. You can find them all. Check them out. You are bound to find something you like, right? Whether it's medieval authentic or weird fantasy, whether it's medieval England or whether it's the Silk Road, or whether it's sci-fi with Star Adventure or modern occult intrigues like with the Invisible College, right? You're going to find something that's cool for you, and I will be very grateful if you check it out. Thank you very much. And well, it took 3 hours, but I finished it. Finished smoking the Stanwell apple and Argento Natural. And that's it for today. Take care, guys.